Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Jake Mercer was a legend. For years, he'd reigned supreme in Mech Ascension, the world's most popular sci-fi game. He'd built and customized hundreds of mechs, but his latest creation, the Apex Fury, was different. It wasn't just a testament to his skill, it was something greater. Something almost a broken bar otherworldly. The Apex Fury had won him the latest championship, but something about it nagged at the back of his mind. No matter how much he replayed the tournament in his head, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't discovered it by accident. Sitting at his high-end gaming rig in the dim glow of his apartment, Jake stared at the mech's blueprint on the screen. He'd found the design in a strange part of the game's database after an update. It was buried deep, almost as if the developers hadn't intended anyone to see it, but Jake had a knack for finding things others missed. And now, the mech's stats and capabilities were unlike anything he'd seen in the game before. It was so powerful, it felt like cheating. A chime echoed through his headset, and a message flashed on his screen. "Do you know where that blueprint really came from?" Jake frowned. The sender's name was masked. He hovered his hand over the mouse, debating whether to reply. Before he could decide, another message popped up. "It's not just a game, Jake. It's bigger than that." The cryptic message annoyed him. He'd had his share of online conspiracy theorists in the past, but something about this was different. The timing, the subject, it all felt too specific. "Who are you?" he typed back. "You'll find out soon enough. But first, look up Project Spectre." The message vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Jake alone in the dark. His curiosity piqued. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Project Spectre? He hadn't heard of anything like that before, but it was worth checking out. Later that night, while the world slept, Jake dove deep into online forums and obscure databases. Hours passed in a blur, but eventually, he found something: an old government project buried under layers of redacted documents. Project Spectre had been classified, linked to military contracts and advanced higher research. The few details he could find hinted at experiments involving mechs, just like in the game. The next morning, Jake called Karen. Karen and Jake had known each other for years. She was a former AI developer for Mech Ascension and had moved on to work for a private tech firm. Karen was smart, resourceful, and, most importantly, she didn't ask too many questions. When Jake told her about the messages and Project Spectre, she was silent for a moment. "I don't know if I should even be talking to you about this," she finally said. "There are things you don't understand, Jake. Things that go way beyond a game." "I'm not looking for trouble, Karen," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. "But I need to know what's really going on with this game." Karen hesitated. "Look, all I can say is that some of the designs in a Mech Ascension weren't a broken bar original. They came from sources the public doesn't know about." "Sources like Project Spectre?" Jake pressed. "Yeah," she whispered. "Something like that." Jake's gut tightened. He wasn't one to believe in coincidences, and this felt like more than just a game. "So, what are we talking about? Military connections? Alien tech? What?" "You don't want to know, Jake," Karen said. "Just leave it alone." "Trust me." But Jake couldn't leave it alone. After the call ended, his mind buzzed with possibilities. Military connections were one thing, but alien tech? That seemed too far-fetched, even for him. Still, the idea stuck in his head, nagging at him as the days passed. It wasn't until a week later that Jake's suspicions were confirmed. Sitting in front of his computer, reviewing news articles, he stumbled across something that made his blood run cold: a newly unveiled military mech, part of a top-secret project. The mech was nearly identical to the Apex Fury he'd been using in-game, right down to the smallest details. Jake's hands trembled as he scrolled through the article. The military was presenting the mech as a breakthrough in cutting-edge technology. But Jake knew better. He recognized the design. It was the same one he'd found in Mech Ascension. Heart pounding, Jake dug deeper, Cross-referencing the military's designs within game Mechs, one by one, he found military machines that mirrored high-tier Mechs from the game, each one more advanced than the last, each one linked to secret military projects. It wasn't a coincidence. The game was more than just entertainment. It was a testing ground, a place where players unknowingly helped shape the future of real-world military technology. Jake felt sick. All those hours spent perfecting his mech builds, all the tournaments, the victories, it had all been part of some larger plan. But who was behind it, and why had they reached out to him? Jake's phone buzzed. It was Karen. "You need to come over," she said, her voice tense. "I found something." Karen's apartment was cluttered with techno computers, wires, and half-finished projects scattered across every surface. She led Jake to her desk, where a series of files were open on her monitor. "I've been looking into it," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "There's a pattern. The high-tier Mechs, the ones that just showed up in the game, they match classified blueprints from an alien civilization called the River." Jake blinked. "Aliens?" Karen nodded, her face pale. "They disappeared millennia ago, but their tech was recovered a few decades back. Only a few people know about it, but that tech is the foundation of a mecha ascension. The developers are using the game to test and refine the designs before integrating them into real-world military systems." Jake shook his head. "That's insane. How could they get away with something like that?" "Because no one's looking," Karen said. "It's all hidden in plain sight. The game's just a cover." Jake's mind raced. "So every mech evolution in the game a broken bar, it's not just for fun. It's influencing real-world weapons." Karen nodded again. "Exactly. And the higher up you go in the game, the more advanced the tech becomes." Jake's stomach churned. "Why did they pick me? Why send me those messages?" Karen hesitated. "Because you're the best player. You've unlocked things no one else has. They need you to push the boundaries." Jake ran a hand through his hair. "And now what?" "I just keep playing their game, helping them build war machines." "Not if we stop them," Karen said. Her eyes were fierce, determined. "I found a way into their system. We can expose everything, but we'll have to hack into the game's core servers. It's risky, but it's the only way to bring them down." Jake hesitated. He wasn't a hacker, and the idea of taking on a shadowy defense contractor scared the hell out of him. But he couldn't ignore the truth. This wasn't just about a game anymore. It was about something far bigger, something dangerous. And if he didn't stop it, no one would. "All right," Jake said finally. "Let's do it." The plan was simple, but the execution would be anything but. Karen had pinpointed the location of the core servers, an isolated corporate facility, heavily guarded and nearly impenetrable. They would have to break in, hack the servers, and upload the data to a global whistleblower site before anyone could stop them. It sounded impossible, but Jake had faced worse odds in game. And now, those skills would come in handy. They set out late that night, armed with nothing but their wits and a few pieces of tech Karen had cobbled together. As they approached the facility, Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a game anymore. One wrong move, and they'd be caught out or worse. Karen led the way, her fingers flying over a handheld device as she disabled the facility's security systems. Jake followed close behind, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. They slipped inside, moving silently through the darkened halls. The servers were in the basement, tucked away behind layers of security. It took Karen several tense minutes to bypass the locks, but eventually, the door slid open. They stepped into the server room, a maze of machines humming quietly in the cool air. Karen set to work immediately, plugging into one of the servers and typing furiously as she navigated through the system. Jake stood guard, his mind racing. Any minute now, someone would realize they were there. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Coring a broken bar. Before he could finish, the lights went out completely. The darkness swallowed them whole. Jake's pulse quickened as his eyes strained to adjust. He heard Karen curse under her breath, her fingers still clacking against the keys in the near pitch black. "They know we're here," she muttered, her voice tense but steady. "Can you finish before they get to us?" Jake whispered, scanning the room for any signs of movement. His mind raced, already imagining guards storming in with guns drawn. "They were sitting ducks here." "I'm almost in," Karen replied, her fingers never slowing. "Just a few more seconds." A broken bar. Those seconds stretched on forever. Jake could feel the sweat beading on his forehead, his body tensing with every passing moment. Then, just as suddenly as the lights had gone out, they flickered back on. A brief relief washed over him until he noticed the sound. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and coming closer. "They're here," Jake said, his voice low but urgent. "I've got it." Karen's triumphant whisper was barely audible over the rising tension. She yanked her device free from the server, shoving it into her bag. "We need to move." Now, without another word, they bolted from the server room, the echo of boots closing in behind them. The corridor felt like it stretched on forever, but Jake's adrenaline kept him moving, pushing past the burn in his legs as they sprinted toward the exit. Just as they rounded the last corner, a voice boomed through the hallway. "Stop!" Jake didn't dare look back. He heard a gun shoot a sharp, deafening crack that ricocheted off the walls. He winced but kept running, Karen just ahead of him, darting through the door that led to the outside. They burst into the night air, but the relief was short-lived. The facility was surrounded by guards, armed and ready. They had no chance of making it out without a fight. Jake's mind spun. There had to be a way out of this. Then, as if answering his unspoken plea, he heard the low hum of engines. He turned just in time to see a sleek, black van screech to a halt a few yards away. The doors flew open, and a masked figure inside waved them over. "This way!" the figure yelled. Jake didn't hesitate. Grabbing Karen's arm, he pulled her toward the van. They dove inside just as bullets whizzed past them. The door slammed shut, and the van took off, tires screeching against the pavement as it sped away. For a moment, the only sound inside the van was their heavy breathing, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The masked figure, who had been driving, glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "You two sure know how to make an exit," the driver said, pulling the mask down to reveal a young man, barely older than Jake. "Name's Ray. Karen called me in case things went south." Jake shot a glance at Karen, who shrugged. "I figured we might need backup." Ray maneuvered the van through the city streets with precision, weaving in and out of traffic until they were clear of any pursuit. After what felt like an eternity, he pulled into an underground parking garage and killed the engine. "All right," Ray said, turning in his seat to face them. "Now that we're safe, care to explain what the hell that was all about?" Jake wiped a hand across his forehead, still catching his breath. "Long story short, we just stole classified data from a defense contractor that's been using alien tech to fuel a war machine disguised as a video game." Ray blinked, then laughed, shaking his head. "Well, damn, that's a new one." Karen pulled out her device, plugging it into her laptop. "We've got what we need," she said, ignoring Ray's sarcasm. "The data's all here. Now we just need to upload it, and the world will know the truth." But just as she started the upload, something strange happened. The laptop screen flickered, then filled with lines of code rapid, incomprehensible, and clearly not under Karen's control. "No, no, no," Karen muttered, her fingers flying over the keys in a desperate attempt to stop whatever was happening. "They're blocking us." Jake's stomach sank. "How?" "We're miles away." "It's the eye," Karen said, her voice tense. "It's connected to the game, and the game's connected to everything. It's adapting. Every time I try to upload, it counteracts me." "We're being locked out in real time." Ray leaned forward, staring at the screen. "So what do we do now?" "We need to go back into the game," Jake said, the realization hitting him hard. "That's where the eye is strongest. It's controlling everything from inside the system. If I can take it down from there, we'll have a chance to break through its defenses." Karen looked skeptical. "You want to fight an eye inside a video game?" Jake nodded, determination hardening his features. "It's the only way." Ray sighed. "All right, hero. Let's gear you up. Back in his apartment, Jake suited up for what felt like the most important match of his life. He slid on his headset, logged into Mech Ascension, and immediately entered the game's most advanced arena, the place where the eye had begun to take on a life of its own. The digital world unfolded around him, a vast, metallic landscape filled with towering mechs, blinding explosions, and the roar of battle. But this wasn't like any battle Jake had faced before. This time, the stakes were real. The eye knew he was coming. It didn't waste any time, sending wave after wave of powerful enemy mechs to crush him. Jake's hands moved instinctively on the controls, guiding Apex Fury into action. The familiar surge of adrenaline coursed through him, but this time, there was a weight behind it, a realization that each move he made here could have consequences in the real world. The eye-controlled mechs were relentless, their attacks precise and devastating. Jake dodged, weaved, and retaliated, using every trick he'd learned over the years. His mech's plasma cannons blazed, cutting through enemy after enemy, but the eye's forces kept coming. Karen, Jake panted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. How much longer? I'm working on it, she replied through his headset. I've almost bypassed the first firewall, but I need you to buy me more time. Jake gritted his teeth. More time. He could do that. Apex Fury's thrusters flared as he launched the mech into the air, raining down a barrage of missiles on the advancing enemies. But even as he fought, he knew the eye was learning, adapting. Suddenly, the battlefield shifted. The digital landscape around him warped and twisted, as if the game itself was fighting back. Jake's controls froze for a moment, then stuttered back to life, but the delay was enough for the eye to strike. A massive mech, larger and more powerful than anything Jake had ever seen in the game, materialized in front of him. Its dark, angular design was unmistakable. This was the Other's ultimate war machine, the one the eye had been preparing for him all along. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The final showdown. The other mech moved with impossible speed, its attacks precise and deadly. Jake barely managed to dodge the first few strikes, his mech's armor sparking under the onslaught. Every time he thought he'd found an opening, the eye countered, driving him further back. Karen, I can't hold this thing off forever, Jake shouted, his hands a blur on the controls. I'm almost there. Karen's voice crackled in his ears. Just a few more seconds. That's all he needed. Jake steeled himself, his mind racing. The eye was faster, stronger, but it wasn't unbeatable. He'd faced impossible odds before, and he'd come out on top. He just needed to outthink it. A plan formed in his mind. He couldn't beat the other mech in a head-to-head fight, but he could use the environment to his advantage. The arena was filled with debris from the earlier battle destroyed mechs, crumbling structures, scattered energy cores. With a burst of speed, Jake darted toward one of the energy cores, grabbing it with Apex Fury's arm. The eye-controlled mech was right behind him, its plasma cannon charging for another devastating shot. Jake waited until the last possible second, then hurled the energy core straight at his enemy. The explosion was blinding, sending shock waves through the arena. The other mech staggered, its armor smoking and cracked. Jake seized the moment, launching a full-scale assault with Apex Fury's plasma cannons and missile barrage. The eye fought back, but it was too late. Jake had found its weakness. Now, Karen! He yelled. The final blow hit the other mech just as Karen's voice crackled through his headset. We're in! The eyes down. The screen flickered, and the battlefield vanished, replaced by a simple, static screen. Jake collapsed back in his chair, his body shaking with exhaustion. It was over. They had won. In the real world, Karen completed the upload. The data went live, exposing the conspiracy to the entire world. Governments, corporations, and military powers scrambled in the aftermath, trying to explain how they had been outsmarted by a video game. Jake had saved more than just a game, he had saved the future. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Nathan Carter had always been a man who craved the stars. As a child, he'd spent hours gazing at the night sky, dreaming of the distant planets he might one day reach. But dreams had a way of slipping through your fingers. A life in space exploration had been Nathan's goal, but after budget cuts and political maneuvering, his program had been scrapped. He never made it beyond the orbit of Earth. Now, years later, he found solace in the most advanced virtual reality game on the market, Beyond the Boundary. It wasn't just a game, not really. In Beyond the Boundary, you could lose yourself for hours to days, even in vast, unexplored galaxies, rich with alien worlds, forgotten civilizations, and the promise of discovery. It was the closest thing to living out his childhood dream of space exploration. The game was more than just a pastime for Nathan, it had become an obsession. The controls, the landscapes, the intricate details of the game universe, it all felt more real to him than anything in his day-to-day life. He sat in his VR rig, adjusting the visor over his eyes and lowering himself into the familiar darkness of the game's startup screen. As the interface flared to life, the stars exploded before him, galaxies swirling in a kaleidoscope of color, and the sensation of weightlessness overcame him. His in-game avatar, lean and athletic, appeared at the helm of a sleek spacecraft, the Atlas, ready to embark on another mission. Nathan's focus was singular. He was heading back to a region of space where, in a previous session, he had stumbled upon something strange. A glitch, maybe, or a new feature the developers hadn't yet disclosed. Either way, it had piqued his interest. The Atlas cut through the simulated void, passing nebulas and asteroid belts with fluid ease. Nathan's fingers danced over the control panel, plotting a course to the uncharted star system that had caught his attention. It had appeared for a brief moment the last time he played, a faint flicker on the edge of the game's map. No other player seemed to notice it. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling that there was something important there, something the game wasn't ready for him to find. As he neared the coordinates, the game's eye assistant chimed in. "Warning, you are entering an unregistered zone. Proceed with caution." Nathan frowned. Unregistered? What the hell does that mean? He wasn't the type to back away from a challenge. He tapped the thrusters and pushed forward, the stars blurring as the Atlas accelerated. The ship's scanners pinged, detecting something ahead. He squinted at the screen. It was a planet, but the readouts were all wrong. No atmosphere, no life, not even a solid core. It didn't belong to any category the game had introduced. He let out a low whistle. What have we got here? As he descended toward the planet's surface, the game's familiar vibrant colors gave way to something else. An airy, gray fog that wrapped around the ship. The ground was jagged and metallic, stretching out like the ribs of some long-dead beast. There were ruins, remnants of a civilization Nathan had never encountered in all his years playing. Giant monolithic structures, carved with symbols that didn't match any alien language he recognized. Something about it felt wrong. The game's eye piped up again. Warning, no data available for this location. Nathan's pulse quickened. This wasn't normal. The developers had filled the game with endless lore and boxery for every species, planet, and anomaly. There was always data. Yet here, there was nothing but silence. He disembarked from the ship, his boots hitting the hard metallic ground with a dull thud, and began exploring. As he wandered through the ruins, his mind raced. What if he'd found a secret part of the game, something only a handful of players had discovered? Maybe he was the first. The thought was exhilarating. He ran his fingers along one of the alien monoliths. It was cold to the touch, unnervingly so. His suit should have been reading the temperature, but the HUD displayed only static. Suddenly, his comms crackled to life. "Carter, is that you?" The voice belonged to Zara, his in-game partner and friend. She'd been a coder once, working for one of the big VR companies before she left the industry to play Beyond the Boundary full-time. Nathan smiled as he tapped his comm. "Zara, you won't believe where I am." "I'm seeing your coordinates," she replied, her tone skeptical. "But I can't get there. Every time I try to warp in, The game kicks me back to my last save. Nathan's heart raced. It's locked for you? Yeah, and for everyone else I know who's tried to access it. You've stumbled onto something big, haven't you? I think so. He looked up at the towering ruins. I'm in a place the game doesn't recognize. No data, no history. I'm the only one here. That's not good, Zara said slowly. Be careful. Neosphere doesn't like it when players find things they're not supposed to. Nathan chuckled. Since when do we play by the rules? Fair point, she admitted, but there was a note of caution in her voice that he wasn't used to hearing. Just keep me updated. If you find something strange, I want to know. Nathan promised he would, but the truth was, he was already hooked. Something about this place gnawed at him, like a puzzle that refused to be solved. As he continued to explore, he noticed more anomalies. The gravity was inconsistent, as sometimes pulling him down hard, other times leaving him light and weightless. And the fog, it seemed to move of its own accord, curling around him like tendrils. Hours passed, or at least it felt that way. Time was hard to measure in the game. He made his way deeper into the ruins until he reached what appeared to be a central chamber. There, in the middle of the room, was something that made his heart stop. A massive machine, ancient and weathered, but still functional. It emitted a low hum, like the beating of a giant heart. He approached cautiously. Before he could examine it more closely, a window popped up on his screen. Incoming communication from Neosphere. He hesitated for a moment, then accepted the call. The screen filled with the stern face of a Neosphere representative, a man in a sharp suit who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. Mr. Carter, the man began, his voice clipped and formal. We've been monitoring your recent activities in Beyond the Boundary. You've accessed an area of the game that was not meant for public discovery. Nathan crossed his arms, a smirk forming on his lips. So what? Isn't the whole point of the game to explore the unknown? This is different, the man said coldly. We are asking you to cease your exploration of that sector immediately. Failure to comply will result in consequences, both in-game and in the real world. The hairs on Nathan's neck stood up. It wasn't the threat that bothered him, it was the certainty in the man's voice, as if this was no longer just a game. He cut the communication without responding and turned back to the machine. Something told him Neosphere was hiding more than just a few glitches. As he examined the device, he saw strange symbols etched into its surface. He activated his scanner, hoping to translate them, but the scanner spat back only gibberish. Frustrated, Nathan reached out and touched the machine. Instantly, his vision blurred, and a surge of energy coursed through him. The world around him flickered, then stabilized, but something had changed. The game felt different now, and more real, more dangerous. A message flashed across his HUD. You have unlocked the Lost Star system. Proceed with caution. Nathan's hands trembled as he read it. The Lost Star system? He'd never heard of anything like that in the game's lore. He had to tell Zara. Before he could call her, though, the fog began to swirl violently around him. The machine hummed louder, and the ground beneath him started to tremble. His instincts screamed at him to get out, but he couldn't tear himself away. Something was happening. Something big. The next moment, the machine powered down, the fog dissipated, and everything went still. Nathan was left standing in the ruins, alone, but with a nagging feeling that the game had just crossed a boundary it was never supposed to. Nathan stood in the eerie silence that followed, heart pounding in his chest. His eyes scanned the ruins once more, but the sense of impending danger had not faded. The machine, now dormant, loomed large behind him, a hulking reminder that he had stumbled onto something far bigger than a mere glitch in the game. Whatever this was, it had the power to disrupt reality. He needed to move, yet he couldn't afford to linger. He tapped his wrist, opening a comm line to Zara. Zara, I think I've done something big. There was static for a moment, then her voice came through, tense and hurried. Nathan, where are you? You've been offline for hours. I've been trying to reach you. Offline? Nathan frowned. No, I've been here. The game's been running. I found this machine, Zara. I unlocked something called the Lost Star System." Her gasp on the other end was audible. You what? Nathan, that's not possible. The Lost Star System is a myth. It's a glitch story players tell each other to explain random crashes or corrupted data. It's not real. Nathan's fingers tightened on his console. Well, it's real enough, and Neosphere knows about it. They tried to warn me off. Zara was silent for a long moment, processing his words. This is bad. If Neosphere's involved, they wouldn't just warn you off without a reason. You need to log out, get out of there. Nathan, whatever you've found, it's not safe. I can't, he replied, pacing back and forth. His instincts screamed at him to keep moving, to stay ahead of whatever was lurking. If I log out now, I might never get back in. They're watching me, Zara. I need to figure out what's going on. The silence stretched longer this time before Zara finally spoke again. Okay, but if you're staying in, then I'm coming with you. I'll find a way around the lockout. Give me a few minutes. Nathan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Hurry. I've got a bad feeling about this. He closed the comm line and turned back to the ruins. Whatever Neosphere was hiding, it had to be related to this lost star system. His curiosity burned hotter now, overriding the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. He had come too far to back down. His instincts had always served him well, and right now, they were telling him that the answers were out there, waiting. The fog began to lift as he walked through the ruins, the metallic landscape stretching out in every direction. In the distance, he could see what looked like a gateway, an archway, tall and imposing, carved with the same strange symbols he'd seen on the machine. It seemed to pulse faintly, like a beacon drawing him in. Without hesitation, Nathan made his way toward it. As he approached, the air around him grew denser, thicker, as though reality itself was bending. His head flickered again, glitching with strange symbols and distorted text. Nathan's fingers hovered over the controls, but he hesitated. The gateway wasn't just an in-game structure, it felt alive. He could sense something emanating from it, a raw energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Without warning, a blast of light shot from the archway, enveloping him in a searing white glow. Nathan instinctively shielded his eyes, but the light was overpowering, blinding. His body felt weightless for a moment, as though he were being pulled through space. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. When the light faded, he was no longer in the ruins. Nathan blinked, disoriented. He stood on the edge of an endless void, stars scattered across the horizon, like glittering jewels against the black canvas of space. But this wasn't the game's typical galaxy. There was no map, no HUD, no familiar markers. He was floating in the lost star system, surrounded by ancient, forgotten stars, the remnants of a civilization long dead. The silence was deafening. Nathan's pulse quickened, his eyes scanning the empty expanse. In the distance, he saw something moving, a slow, deliberate, a massive structure, larger than any ship or station he had ever seen, loomed in the dark. Its design was unlike anything in the game's catalog, ancient and otherworldly, yet oddly familiar. It glowed with a soft, pulsing light, and Nathan knew instinctively that this was the heart of the lost star system. His ship, the Atlas, materialized beside him as if summoned by his thoughts. Nathan climbed aboard, setting a course for the structure. As the ship moved closer, details emerged: massive spires, jagged and broken, with streams of energy coursing through them like veins. The ship's scanners went wild, feeding him streams of indecipherable data. Whatever this was, it wasn't part of the game. It was something else, something more. He docked at a platform that extended from the structure's core. The ship's systems hummed quietly as he disembarked, stepping into the unknown once again. Inside, the structure was vast, its corridors lined with symbols and carvings that seemed to shift and change as he moved. There were no NPCs, no eye to guide him, only the faint hum of energy that reverberated through the walls. Nathan moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. The deeper he went, the more he felt like he was trespassing, like this place wasn't meant for him or anyone. He reached the central chamber, much like the one he had seen in the ruins, but larger, more ominous. In the center of the room stood another machine, identical to the one he had found before, but this one was active. It pulsed with energy, a deep, resonant thrum that shook the floor beneath his feet. As he approached, his comm crackled. "Nathan, it's Zara. I'm in." "Where are you?" "I don't know," he whispered. "This place. It's not part of the game." Zara's voice came through, filled with tension. "I've been looking into Neosphere. They've been experimenting with something, using the game as a cover. They're trying to access something beyond the simulation, something real." Nathan's breath caught. "Real? What do you mean?" "I mean, they've found a way to merge the virtual world with reality. That lost star system, it's not just code. It's a doorway, Nathan, a doorway to something that exists beyond our universe." Nathan's mind reeled. A doorway? He looked at the machine in front of him, the energy radiating from it like a heartbeat. "And what happens if we open that door?" "I don't know," Zara admitted, her voice soft. "But whatever it is, it's dangerous. Neosphere has been keeping it hidden for a reason." Nathan's fingers twitched at his side, his mind racing. He had come here for answers, but now he wasn't sure he wanted them. If Neosphere had been hiding this, it wasn't just a game glitch, it was something far worse. But before he could decide what to do, the machine flared to life, its pulsing rhythm quickening. A voice, low and guttural, filled the chamber. "You have come too far, traveler." Nathan froze, his eyes darting around the room. The voice wasn't coming from his comet, it was coming from the machine. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his chest. "We are the architects of the boundary you have crossed," the voice replied. "And you are not meant to be here." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "Then why leave the door open?" The machine's hum deepened, the air growing thick with tension. "The door was not left open. You forced your way through." Nathan glanced around, his mind racing. He had to get out of here. But something told him that leaving wouldn't be as simple as logging out. "What do you want from me?" "To fix the breach," the voice answered, "or suffer the consequences." The machine's energy flared again, and suddenly, the walls around Nathan began to ripple, reality itself distorting as if the virtual world was being torn apart. He stumbled back, panic rising in his chest. "Zara, I need help, now." Her voice crackled through the comm, frantic. "I'm trying to get you out, but the system's locking me out. Neosphere's own to us." Nathan's heart pounded as the chamber shook violently, the ground beneath him splitting open. The machine let out a deafening roar, its energy surging toward him. He had one chance. If he could shut it down, maybe just maybe he could stop whatever was happening. He sprinted toward the machine, his hands flying over the controls. The energy crackled around him, threatening to tear him apart, but he didn't stop. With one final push, he slammed his fist onto the main console, triggering a shutdown sequence. The machine screeched, its lights flickering, and then, with a final shudder, it powered down. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the effort. The chamber was still, the distortion gone, but he knew the danger hadn't passed. Zara's voice came through, breathless with relief. "You did it. I'm pulling you out now. Hang tight." Nathan didn't argue. He closed his eyes as the familiar sensation of the game fading washed over him, the virtual world dissolving into nothingness. When he finally opened his eyes, he was back in his VR rig, the cool air of his apartment hitting his skin. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen in front of him, his mind racing. The game was over, but the implications of what he'd discovered were far from it. The lost star system wasn't just a gamia, it was something real, something dangerous, and Neosphere wasn't going to let it go. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Ethan Drake's fingers danced over the controls, His focus narrowed to a pinpoint as he directed his in-game team. Their virtual world pulsed around him, alien landscapes filled with glowing flora and jagged, hostile terrain. Above them, twin moons illuminated the scarred surface of the planet. The alien creatures swarmed in from the dark corners of the game's latest expansion, their forms flickering like glitches in a system that was never quite sure how to render their grotesque, inhuman shapes. "Ethan, they're breaching the north gate." A voice crackled through his headset. "I've got it," he replied, voice calm, almost too calm given the situation. His fingers flew. He directed resources, pulling energy from the reserve stockpile they had stashed just outside the walls of their base. It wasn't a large amount, but it would hold long enough. His team of 6 others from across the globe awaited on his orders. Ethan deployed a defensive drone swarm to the north gate, the miniature flying machines crackling with electric charges as they attacked the incoming alien wave. "Drone deployment successful," he muttered to himself, half out of habit. "Initiate repulsion field." The aliens hit the field like bugs splattering against a windshield. Their gnashing jaws and claws dissolved into pixelated dust as the drones cleaned up the rest of the wave. For the moment, they were safe. "That's why we follow Ethan," one of his teammates, a deep-voiced Australian named Pierce, said with a chuckle. "The man's a genius." Ethan didn't respond to the compliment. He rarely did. His mind was already running the next scenario, preparing for the game's escalating difficulty curve. Each wave was harder, more relentless than the last. Apocalypse Survival was designed that way, incremental difficulty until even the best players hit their limit. But Ethan hadn't hit his yet. He never did. The victory screen flashed across the game's heads-up display, followed by the usual reward tally. Credits, new base upgrades, access to the next level of alien tech. All routine for someone of Ethan's rank. His team erupted in celebration, but he simply leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark, unruly hair. Another win. He rubbed his eyes, the strain from hours of gameplay finally catching up with him. As the top player in the game, he was used to the routine of winning, but lately, even the thrill of victory had started to feel hollow. He logged off the game, pulling off the immersive headset and setting it on his desk. His small apartment was dim, lit only by the screen's lingering glow. Ethan stretched, cracking his neck. It had been a long session, but he wasn't in the mood to unwind just yet. He was about to head to the kitchen for a drink when there was a knock at his door. Ethan frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Most of his friends teammates were virtual. People didn't just show up at his door. He walked over, peering through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, looking far too serious for Ethan's comfort. His expression was a mix of impatience and urgency. "Ethan Drake?" the man asked when Ethan opened the door slightly, still unsure whether to trust him. "Yeah, that's me." "Who's asking?" "Agent Monroe." "I'm with the government." "May I come in?" Ethan's first instinct was to shut the door, but something about the man's tone kept him in place. There was an edge to it, a weight that suggested this wasn't some ordinary government visit. Ethan stepped aside, allowing Monroe in. The agent moved swiftly, stepping into the small apartment with an air of authority. He wasted no time, pulling out a small tablet and handing it to Ethan. On it was a series of images, fuzzy at first, but then clear as day. Alien landscapes, structures, creatures that looked disturbingly familiar. "I'm sure you recognize these," Monroe said. His voice was cool, steady. Ethan blinked, staring at the images. This is from the game." Monroe shook his head. "Number." "It's not." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He glanced back at the tablet, heart starting to race as the implications began to sink in. These images, they weren't pixelated or rendered. They were real. "That's impossible," Ethan said, shaking his head. "It's just a game." "The game was based on classified information," Monroe replied, his tone devoid of any humor. "The developers were given data about a planet outside our solar system. A rogue planet that's now on a direct path towards us." Ethan swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. "You're saying this? This is real?" Monroe nodded. The game was a way to simulate what would happen when the planet got close enough for these things to come to us, and it's happening now. "We need your help." "Why me?" Ethan's voice came out sharper than he intended. "I'm just a gamer." "You're not just a gamer, you're the best." Monroe's eyes narrowed. "And right now, we need the best." Ethan sat down, his mind spinning. This had to be some kind of prank, right? But the look on Monroe's face told him otherwise. There was no punchline coming. The agent continued, "We've been preparing for this for years, but we didn't expect the planet to accelerate its approach. Our defenses aren't ready, and we're facing an invasion unlike anything we've ever seen. You've fought these creatures in the game, you know their tactics, their weaknesses. That's why we need you to help guide our defense strategy." Ethan stared at the tablet again, the images swimming in front of his eyes. This was real. All of it. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice low. "Not long," Monroe replied. "We've already lost a lunar base to the first wave." The weight of the situation settled on Ethan's chest like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just playing a game anymore. This was life or death. This is insane, Ethan thought, but he couldn't ignore the facts. If the images were real, then the stakes were too. He'd spent thousands of hours in that virtual world. Every corner, every strategy, every alien attack pattern was etched into his brain. And now, it was all coming to life. Monroe's voice cut through his thoughts. "We'll take care of the logistics. You'll be briefed on everything once we reach the command center. Are you in?" Ethan took a deep breath, his mind still reeling. He didn't have a choice. If what Monroe was saying was true, this was bigger than anything he'd ever faced before. Bigger than him. Bigger than the game. "I'm in," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Monroe gave a curt nod, then gestured for Ethan to follow him. "Let's go." "Time's running out." Ethan had been in some strange places before, but nothing compared to the underground complex they took him to. As the elevator descended, Monroe filled him in on the details. Though most of it went over Ethan's head, he was more focused on the fact that the world as he knew it might be ending. It was one thing to play a game where the fate of humanity was in your hands, but it was something entirely different when it was real. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan was greeted by a scene straight out of a science fiction movie. Huge screens covered the walls, displaying real-time feeds of the Earth's defense networks, the moon bases, and the rogue planet's approach. The air buzzed with the hum of machines and the chatter of technicians racing to prepare for the coming onslaught. "Welcome to the Solar Defense Initiative," Monroe said as they stepped off the elevator. "This is where we're coordinating the planet's defense." Ethan's gaze swept the room, taking in the military personnel, scientists, and engineers scrambling to get everything in order. It was a controlled chaos, but beneath the surface, he could sense the fear. These people were facing an enemy they didn't fully understand, and they were running out of time. "Dr. Ava Mitchell will be your main point of contact," Monroe said, gesturing to a woman standing in front of a large tactical screen. "She's been leading the research on the aliens." Ava turned to greet them, her brown eyes sharp and focused. "Ethan Drake," she said, sizing him up. "I've heard about you. I just didn't think we'd actually be using a gamer to save the world." "Trust me, I didn't either," Ethan replied, managing a small, nervous smile. Ava wasted no time leading Ethan to the tactical screen. The display showed the rogue planet, Orion V, steadily moving through space, its course unmistakably aimed at the solar system. Zooming in, Ethan saw what had to be the alien ships, dark and massive, hovering just beyond Earth's sensor range. "We've studied their movements for months," Ava said, her voice clipped and efficient. "But we're still behind. These things are relentless, and our current tactics aren't slowing them down." "That's where you come in." Ethan blinked at the screen, absorbing the information. "I'm guessing you've already tried the basics: artillery, nukes, Standard defensive measures? Ava nodded. Everything we have. But they adapt too quickly. Our biggest problem is that they're not fighting like any enemy we've faced. It's not even war by our definitions. It's almost calculated, like they're testing us. Ethan's mind spun back to the game. He had faced these kinds of strategic maneuvers before. They're probing for weaknesses, testing your responses. They're learning, just like in the game. Ava raised an eyebrow. That's what we suspected. So, what's your recommendation? Ethan hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the room's eyes on him. But then his instincts kicked in. In the game, the trick wasn't to outgun them, it was to outthink them. They react to patterns, to anything that seems predictable. If you want to beat them, you have to act outside their expectations. He walked over to the console, tapping through the data as his mind worked through the possibilities. You need to use guerrilla tactics, diversionary strikes, decoys, even fakes. Make them second guess every move you make. But more than that, you've got to be faster than them at adaptation. Ava crossed her arms, listening intently. You're suggesting we scatter our defenses? That sounds risky. It is, Ethan admitted. But it's the only way to stop them from pushing in with brute force. In the game, they'd send a huge wave at one weak point, expecting players to throw everything they had to defend. But if you make them think there are other threats at other fronts to deal with, they'll have to split their forces. It's all about misdirection. Monroe, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke up. What about our resources? Earth doesn't have an infinite supply of drones and troops to throw around. Ethan looked at him sharply. That's why you make them think you do. You don't need real soldiers everywhere. Use holograms, old equipment, anything that can create the illusion of strength. The room went silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the gravity of Ethan's suggestion. Ava's fingers hovered over the console, her eyes locked on the screen in front of them. All right, she said slowly, let's test this. I'll get the engineers to start modifying our drone systems for decoys. But we'll need more time for a full rollout. The next wave hits in less than 24 hours. Ethan nodded. Then we make this first battle a test. We won't win it outright, but we can throw them off balance. They won't know what's real and what's fake. For the next several hours, Ethan worked with Ava and her team, adjusting defense grids and implementing his strategies. It was surreal watching the game he knew so well being applied to a real-life scenario. But there was no room for hesitation. If he slipped up, people would die. As the countdown to the next wave approached, the tension in the room grew palpable. Ethan stood at the command center, watching as screens filled with live feeds from various defense stations scattered across Earth and the Moon. Engineers buzzed around, making last-minute adjustments to the decoy systems. Soldiers, pilots, and drone operators waited in silence for the inevitable attack. Ethan felt the weight of their expectations. These weren't just faceless avatars. Real people, real lives depended on him now. Suddenly, a warning siren blared. The aliens were on the move. Here we go, Ava muttered, eyes fixed on the incoming blips moving across the radar. Ethan leaned forward, gripping the edge of the console. Remember, he said into the mic that connected him to Earth's forces, don't engage until I give the signal. We need them to believe the decoys are real targets. The alien ships broke into the atmosphere like meteorites, their dark forms streaking through the sky. Across Earth's defense stations, soldiers watched in awe as the ships hovered, silent and ominous. Then, just as Ethan had predicted, the aliens began their assault, concentrating on the most heavily fortified positions. They're going for the obvious targets, Ava said, her voice tight with tension. Good, Ethan replied. That's what we want. He waited, fingers twitching with anticipation as the aliens unloaded wave after wave of drones and ground troops on Earth's key defense hubs. But just as the battle intensified, Ethan gave the order, activate the decoys. Around the globe, holographic projections of military bases and defensive structures flickered to life. Old, disused equipment hummed and rumbled, sending out false signals. The aliens shifted, detecting the new threats, just as Ethan had hoped. "They're diverting forces," one of the techs shouted, monitoring the radar. "Keep pushing them," Ethan ordered. "Make them spread thin. Don't let them regroup." As the alien forces split to engage the decoy sites, Earth's real defenses struck. Drone swarms and artillery opened fire, catching the aliens off guard. The first few waves of alien drones were obliterated in minutes, their ships left scrambling to adapt. Ethan could feel the adrenaline pumping through him, his mind working faster than ever. This was the kind of challenge he had thrived on in the game, only now it was real. Every move, every order had consequences. But they were working. They were winning. "Drake, we've got them," Pierce's voice crackled through Ethan's headset. He had been stationed at one of the decoy sites, coordinating the on-ground operations. "They're falling back." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Keep the pressure on them. We need to buy more time." The battle raged on, but Ethan's strategy had turned the tide. The aliens, disoriented by the decoys and unable to consolidate their forces, were forced to retreat, leaving behind wreckage and debris. Earth had survived the first wave. When the last of the alien ships finally broke away from Earth's atmosphere, retreating to the safety of Orion V, the room erupted in cheers. Technicians high-fived each other, soldiers slumped in relief, and even Ava allowed herself a weary smile. Ethan, however, remained silent. His mind was already moving ahead, anticipating the next move. "That was just the first wave," he said, looking at Monroe and Ava. "They'll be back, stronger and smarter." Monroe nodded. "But now we know we can beat them." "Thanks to you." Ava stepped forward, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "You saved a lot of lives today, Ethan." He nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his heart. "Yeah, but it's not over. We need to adapt faster than they can. Otherwise, this was just a delay." The room quieted again, the weight of his words settling in. They had won this round, but the war was far from over. Ethan had lived through endless battles in the game, but this was different. The stakes were higher, and the consequences of failure were real. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The universe was a graveyard. At least, that's what it felt like in the game Space Debris. Players drifted through the vast remnants of shattered worlds, lost civilizations, and battles long forgotten. Eli Morgan sat at the controls of his ship, staring out into the endless field of broken metal and wreckage, his eyes scanning for anything of value. "Got anything yet?" The voice of his crewmate, Maya, crackled through the comms. "Nothing but scrap so far," Eli replied, adjusting the ship's trajectory. "Looks like this sector's been picked clean." They were in a remote part of the game's universe, far from the central hubs where most players congregated. The debris field stretched for miles in every direction, a graveyard of starships, ancient battle stations, and fragments of alien technology. It was the perfect place for scavengers like them. Eli's crew had been working together for months, slowly building their reputation as skilled scavengers who could navigate the most dangerous parts of the game. But lately, competition had been fierce. Bigger guilds were moving in, staking claims on valuable finds. The small, tightly knit team of 4 was finding it harder and harder to stay ahead. Eli glanced at the holographic display in front of him, the ship's sensors sweeping through the debris. Nothing. His fingers tightened on the controls, a hint of frustration creeping in. They needed a big score, something that could keep them afloat for the next few weeks. Otherwise, they might have to sell off one of their smaller ships just to make ends meet. As the scanner continued its sweep, Eli's attention was pulled to an anomaly, a faint, almost imperceptible energy signature coming from deep within the debris field. It was weak, but distinct enough to catch his attention. "Hold up," he muttered, zooming in on the coordinates. "I think I've got something." "What is it?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Not sure yet. Could be nothing, a broken bar, or it could be something big." Without waiting for a reply, Eli adjusted the ship's course, weaving through the jagged wreckage. His heart pounded in his chest as the signal grew stronger. This was different from the usual scraps of metal and broken tech they came across. This felt a broken bar ancient. The ship's lights cast eerie shadows on the debris as they approached the source of the signal. And then, it came into view, a massive structure, half buried beneath layers of wreckage. It was unlike anything Eli had ever seen in the game before. Holy, Maya's voice cut out, as if she couldn't find the words. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. Its surface was smooth, made of a dark, iridescent material that seemed to shimmer in the faint light. Alien symbols and patterns were etched into the surface, glowing faintly. "What the hell is that?" asked Jake, another crewmate, as he joined the conversation. Eli didn't answer right away. He was too focused, eyes scanning every inch of the strange structure. His gut told him this was the big score they had been waiting for. "We need to get inside," Eli said finally, his voice firm. "These broken bar, this could be worth more than anything we've ever found." The ship's landing gear touched down on the surface of the structure with a soft thud. Eli, Maya, Jake, and the fourth member of their team, Luca, gathered at the airlock, tension hanging in the air. They were seasoned players, but even they couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this discovery. As the airlock opened, Eli stepped out first, his boots clanging softly on the metallic surface. The alien markings glowed faintly beneath his feet, casting an otherworldly light across the structure. "This place gives me the creeps," Maya muttered as she followed behind him. "Just stay focused," Eli said, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." They made their way across the structure, searching for an entrance. It wasn't long before they found a large, circular hatch embedded in the surface. The alien symbols surrounding the hatch pulsed with a faint energy, almost as if it was alive. "Jake, you're up," Eli said, motioning toward the hatch. Jake, the team's resident tech expert, knelt down in front of the hatch and began working on it, his fingers dancing across his holographic tools. After a few tense moments, the hatch hissed open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. Eli's heart raced as he led the way inside, the glow of their helmets casting flickering beams of light through the darkness. The interior was vast, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers that seemed to stretch on forever. Alien technology lined the walls, humming with an ancient, dormant power. "This is insane," Luca whispered, his voice filled with awe. "We hit the jackpot." They continued deeper into the structure, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The further they went, the stronger the feeling that they had stumbled upon something truly significant. And then, they found it. At the center of the structure, in a massive, dome-shaped chamber, sat the weapon. It was unlike anything Eli had ever seen. Towering over them, the weapon was a sleek, alien device, its surface covered in intricate patterns and symbols. Energy pulsed through it, giving off a faint, ominous hum. "These broken bar, this can't be real," Maya breathed, staring up at the weapon in disbelief. Eli felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't need to be told what this was. The stories of ancient alien super weapons had been whispered about in the game's lore for years, but no one had ever found one, until now. "What do we do?" Luca asked, his voice shaky. "Do we take it?" Eli hesitated, his mind racing. This was the discovery that could change everything. But with that power came unimaginable danger. If they took this weapon, they would become the most powerful players in the game. But they would also be marked for life, hunted by every other faction, every other player. "We can't leave it here," Maya said, her voice filled with determination. "If we don't take it, someone else will." Jake was already running scans on the device, his face lit up with excitement. "This thing could be worth billions. We'd be set for life." Eli's stomach churned. It wasn't just the money, or the power. It was the responsibility. This weapon wasn't just a game item, it was a game changer. Whoever controlled it could reshape the entire universe, not just within space debris, but in the larger world of gaming as well. Players would fight wars over it, guilds would rise and fall, the balance of power would shift. Wait, Eli said, his voice cutting through the excitement. We need to think about this. The team fell silent, their eyes on him. If we take this weapon, we're not just scavengers anymore. We become targets. Everyone will come after us. The Syndicate, the Galactic Council, a broken bar hell, even the developers might get involved. Do we really want to be at the center of that? Maya frowned, clearly torn. But we can't just leave it. This is our chance, Eli. Our chance to be more than just nobodies. Luca and Jake exchanged glances, waiting for Eli's decision. As the leader of the crew, the final call was his. But no matter what he chose, there would be consequences. Eli stood there, staring up at the weapon, his mind racing. The weight of the decision was suffocating. Maya was right, they couldn't just leave it here. The galaxy was filled with players hungry for power, and if they walked away, someone else would find it. But Maya wasn't seeing the bigger picture. This wasn't just some powerful game artifact. This was a super weapon capable of altering the entire landscape of space debris and, possibly, the wider gaming world. Jake continued his scans, his fingers tapping feverishly on the holographic display. This thing, a broken bar, it's more advanced than anything we've ever seen. The energy core alone could power a fleet of ships. But these, a broken bar, this is military grade tech, not just some regular weapon. Eli rubbed his forehead, feeling the tension building. The choices were clear, but neither option felt right. Take the weapon and become instant targets, or leave it and let the galaxy's balance be thrown into chaos when someone else inevitably claimed it. We can't let this fall into the wrong hands, Eli muttered. Then it has to be ours, Maya pressed. We've been scraping by for months. This is our chance to break out. You know what the Syndicate would do with this, right? Or the Council. If they get their hands on it, the whole game changes permanently. Luca, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. But what if we're not the ones to change it for the better? What if this thing is too dangerous? Maybe it was meant to stay buried. Eli glanced at Luca, appreciating his caution. Luca had always been the voice of reason in the group, the one who kept them grounded when their ambitions threatened to get the better of them. Jake, who had been studying the symbols on the weapon, suddenly froze. Guys, a broken bar, you might want to see this. Eli walked over to Jake's station, peering at the display. On the screen was a symbol, ancient and unfamiliar, but something about it sent a chill down Eli's spine. It's a control interface, Jake explained. I think a broken bar, I think it's alive. Or at least, the eye inside it is. It's waiting for a command. Command to do what? Maya asked. Jake swallowed, clearly uneasy. It's a broken bar, a star killer. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eli felt his chest tighten. A star killer. This wasn't just some game-breaking weapon that could destroy ships or stations. This was something far worse, something capable of wiping out entire solar systems. That's insane, Lucas said, shaking his head. Why would anyone build something like that? Maya stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the weapon. Because whoever controls it, controls everything. If we had these, a broken bar, no one could stop us. Or, Eli interjected, his voice steady but cold, we could wipe out entire systems by accident. Think about the consequences, Maya. If we use this, even once, there's no going back. Not for us. Not for anyone. A long, tense silence followed. The hum of the weapon was the only sound in the cavernous chamber. Eli's mind raced. There had to be a way to handle this without blowing everything up, metaphorically or literally. But every option seemed to lead to disaster. As the team stood there, deliberating, Eli's communication device crackled to life. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, as someone Eli instantly recognized. Hello, Eli, the voice said, dripping with malice. It was Dane Core, leader of the Syndicate. I hear you've found something interesting. I'd like to discuss it. Eli's blood ran cold. How had he known? His hand went instinctively to his sidearm, though he knew that wouldn't be much help against a fleet of syndicate ships. "How do you?" Eli began, but Core cut him off. "Doesn't matter how I know, what matters is that you and your little crew are sitting on a weapon that could shift the balance of power, and I'm here to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, like yours." Eli's mind raced. Core wasn't someone to be reasoned with. He was a ruthless player, notorious for taking what he wanted by force. And if the syndicate was involved, that meant things were about to get ugly. "What do you want, Core?" Eli asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I want the weapon, simple as that," Core replied. "Hand it over, and I'll make sure you and your crew walk away from this alive. Refuse, and, well, a broken bar. You can imagine the alternative." Eli glanced at his crew. Maya looked ready to fight, her hand hovering near her own weapon. Jake was tense, eyes flicking between the weapon and the comms device. Luke had just stared at Eli, waiting for the call. "We're not giving you anything," Eli said, his voice firm. "This weapon doesn't belong in your hands." Core chuckled darkly. "Brave words, Eli, but bravery doesn't mean much when you're dead. You've got 5 minutes to reconsider. After that, we'll come and take it by force." "Your choice." The comms went dead, leaving Eli and his crew in tense silence. "Well, that's just great," Jake muttered. "Now what?" Eli's mind raced. They had only a few minutes before the syndicate would be on top of them. They couldn't just fight their way out. Core had too many resources, too many ships. And even if they could escape, the syndicate would hunt them down. They needed a plan, and fast. "Jake," Eli said, turning to him. "Can we activate the weapon?" Jake's eyes widened. "You're serious? You want to use this thing, just as a bluff?" Eli clarified. "If Core thinks we're willing to use it, maybe he'll back off. We don't actually fire it. We just make them think we will." "That's a hell of a gamble," Maya said, frowning. "If we miscalculate, we could blow the whole system." "Do we have a choice?" Eli asked, his voice sharp. "Core's not going to let us walk away. Our only shot is to convince him we've got the upper hand." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "I think I can rig it to look like we're preparing to fire. But once we activate it, the clock's ticking. We'll only have a few minutes before it fully powers up." "That's all we need," Eli said, glancing at the others. "Get ready." While Jake worked on the controls, Maya and Luke prepared for a potential fight. Eli's heart raced. The plan was risky, dangerous, even, but it was the only shot they had. A few tense minutes passed as Jake fiddled with the controls. Finally, the weapon hummed to life, the energy readings on Jake's display spiking. "It's active," Jake said, his voice tense, "but it's not fully powered yet." Eli opened the comms again, his voice steady but cold. "Core, you still there? Changed your mind?" Core's voice was smug. "Not exactly," Eli replied. "We've activated the weapon. It's powering up as we speak. If you try to take it from us, we'll fire it." "I don't think you want to see what happens when a star killer goes off." There was a long pause on the other end of the comms. Eli could almost hear Core weighing his options. "You're bluffing," Core said finally, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Are we?" Eli replied. "You've got about 2 minutes before this thing's fully charged. If you don't back off by then, we'll have no choice but to use it. And trust me, you don't want to be in the blast radius." Another long silence followed. Eli held his breath, waiting for Core's response. Then, finally, Core spoke. "Fine, you win this round, Eli. But don't think this is over. The syndicate doesn't forget." The comms went dead, and Eli let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had won at least for now. But Core was right. This wasn't over. The syndicate would be back, and next time, they might not be so lucky. "Shut it down," Eli said, turning to Jake. "We're not using this thing. Not now, not ever." Jake quickly deactivated the weapon, the energy readings dropping back to safe levels. The team gathered in the central chamber, exhausted but relieved. "We need to figure out what to do with this," Eli said, his voice heavy. "We can't keep it, but we can't just leave it here either." Luca, ever the pragmatist, nodded. Maybe the Galactic Council can help. They've got the resources to safeguard something like this. Maya sighed. But can we trust them? Eli didn't have an answer. The truth was, there were no good options. Every choice came with risks, with consequences. But one thing was clear, the weapon couldn't remain in their hands. We'll contact the council, Eli said finally. Let them deal with it. We've done enough. The team prepared to leave, their ship's engines humming to life as they lifted off the surface of the alien structure. As they ascended, Eli took one last look at the weapon below. The Stellar Reaper, capable of reshaping entire solar systems, was now someone else's problem. But as they flew away, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The universe was vast, full of secrets and dangers, and this was just one of many. They had survived today, but tomorrow, a broken bar tomorrow, was a different story. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Alex Winters leaned back in his worn leather chair, staring at the holographic interface that flickered in front of him. The cool glow of the Void Dominion logo floated in the air, the letters sleek and metallic, casting faint shadows against the gray walls of his cramped apartment. The game's tagline blinked beneath it: "Conquer the stars, rule the galaxy." He smirked. It wasn't just a game anymore, at least not for him. With a flick of his wrist, the screen expanded, revealing the galactic map of the game world of vast clusters of star systems, some controlled by rival players, others in his growing empire. Alex had risen quickly in the rankings, and now, at just 26, he was one of the most feared rulers in Void Dominion. It was more than just skill. It was an obsession. The universe in Void Dominion had consumed his every thought, every waking moment. He didn't care. After all, what did he have left? The buzz of a new message snapped him out of his reverie. His finger hovered over the alert, hesitating for a moment. The sender's name read Spectre. Chosen. That single word made his pulse quicken, though he didn't know why. He'd seen the name before. Rhea Spectre had appeared a few times in the game's top-tier arenas, always pulling off impossible victories, vanishing before anyone can learn more. Alex clicked the message. "You have been chosen." The message blinked, then dissolved into the interface. Chosen for what? Alex muttered to himself. Before he could ponder further, the game map shifted, pulling him into a new battle, a real-time engagement against another top-tier player. Focus. No time for distractions. His hands moved quickly over the controls, commanding fleets, launching probes, dispatching fighter squadrons. The enemy's forces were fast, darting in and out of asteroid fields, but Alex's superior tactics were relentless. Within minutes, the opposing player's fleet was decimated. Victory again. Another system under his control. But the message from Spectre lingered in his mind. Chosen. For what? Days passed, and the game continued. Alex's empire grew as he won battle after battle. Alliances formed and fell, and the vastness of Void Dominion stretched out before him like an infinite playground. Yet, something gnawed at him. It wasn't just Spectre's cryptic message. It was the feeling that the game itself had started to change. NPC saw those characters meant to be mindless, scripted additions to the game world began acting a broken bar differently. Some of them seemed aware, alive, even. It was during one of these battles that it happened again. Alex was navigating his fleet through a nebula field, ambushing a rival clan's convoy, when an alien trader ship suddenly veered off its course. His eyes narrowed as he zoomed in. The ship isn't just avoiding the battle, it was heading directly toward one of his outposts. That wasn't normal behavior. NPCs didn't act on their own. "Let's see what you're up to," Alex muttered, diverting a frigate to intercept. The trader ship stopped before reaching his station, and a communication panel popped up on Alex's screen. "You have been chosen." This time, the message was accompanied by the image of a tall, dark figure, shrouded in shadow. Spectre. The same name. The same haunting message. Alex leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding. He'd spent countless hours in the game, seen every possible trick and strategy, But this was new. Was it a glitch, a hack, or something else? Before he could react, his screen flickered, and his avatar in his in-game representation it collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Alex's body jolted back, a sharp stab of pain lancing through his chest. His breath hitched as he gasped, grabbing his shirt instinctively, though there was nothing physically wrong with him. He stared at the screen, wide-eyed. The game, he had felt it. The traitor ship disappeared from his view, leaving behind only that cryptic message. Alex shut down the game, rubbing his temples as he paced the length of his apartment. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the pain of the shock of Ida had felt all too genuine. Something was happening. Something bigger than he could understand. He needed answers. Later that night, after several sleepless hours, he stumbled onto a forum for high-level Void Dominion players. Hidden among the usual posts about tactics, alliances, and battles, there was a thread. The game is real. Alex scrolled through it, his heart racing. The players, so many of them top-ranked, like Hema, described strange occurrences similar to his, cryptic messages from NPCs, sudden bursts of pain during gameplay, hints that Void Dominion wasn't just a game, it was something much more. One username caught his attention: Lydia Torres. She was a legend in the game, having dominated vast sections of the universe before mysteriously vanishing a year ago. Her post stood out. They're real. The Drakari. They're watching us, training us. Meet me if you want to know the truth. A location followed: New Haven Cafe, downtown. It was insane, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that she was telling the truth. He needed to find her. The cafe was dimly lit, tucked between a string of aging buildings on a narrow street in the city. Alex's nerves were on edge as he scanned the room. Lydia sat in the back, a woman in her early 30s, her sharp eyes betraying a depth of knowledge and experience. She nodded as he approached, waving him over. "You came," she said, her voice calm but heavy with an undercurrent of urgency. "I need answers," Alex replied, sitting across from her. "What's going on? Why did you leave the game?" Lydia took a slow breath, glancing around the cafe before leaning in. "Void Dominion, a broken bar. It's not just a game, it's a recruitment tool, a training ground." "For what?" "For the Drakari, an alien species. They've been watching us, selecting the best players as strategists, tacticians to become their future rulers. The game simulates real battles, real conflicts happening across the galaxy. The top players, we're their candidates." Alex stared at her, disbelief warring with the memory of the pain he'd felt. "That's insane." "It sounds that way, but it's the truth. I didn't believe it either until they contacted me. They showed me what's really out there. And now a broken bar. They're reaching out to you." "Why me?" "You're rising too fast. They've noticed. The best players are brought into something called the Void Trials. It's not a game anymore. It's real. You've felt it, haven't you?" "The pain?" Alex nodded slowly, still processing her words. "What do they want from us?" "To see if we're worthy, if we're capable of leading their armies, controlling entire systems. The Void Trials are the final test. Win, and you're offered power beyond anything you can imagine." "But Lucia broken bar." Lydia's eyes darkened. "Well, you don't get another chance." He ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "What happens next?" "They'll invite you. You'll face the trials soon. But remember this, Alex, once you start, there's no going back. You'll either become one of them, or you'll lose everything, and I mean everything." Alex stood, his pulse racing with equal parts fear and excitement. "I'll do it. I don't have anything to lose." Lydia nodded grimly. "Then you're ready." It didn't take long for the invitation to come. A few days later, as Alex was navigating through another intense in-game battle, the screen froze. His avatar stood still, suspended in the center of a vast, dark space. Then the words appeared: "Welcome to the Void Trials." Before he could react, the world around him shifted. The screen blurred, and Alex felt himself being pulled transported into a new reality. The apartment dissolved, replaced by a massive alien space station, its walls lined with strange symbols and glowing blue energy. Alex's heart pounded as he looked around. Dozens of other players stood nearby, their faces a mix of awe and terror. In the center of the room, a holographic figure appeared, a tall, slender alien with pale skin and glowing eyes. The Drakari. "You have been chosen," the figure intoned, its voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The void trials will determine your fate. Survive, and you will be given control over entire star systems. Fail, and you will cease to exist in both this world and the one you know." Alex swallowed hard. This was it. The game had just become terrifyingly real. Alex stood frozen, the words of the Drakari still echoing in his mind. "Survive, or you will cease to exist." His heart pounded, but he steadied himself. This was no longer a game, and the stakes were far beyond what he had imagined. He scanned the other contestants. They were a mix of the best players he had fought alongside and against in Void Dominion, their faces twisted with fear or hardened with determination. The alien space station hummed around them, its walls pulsating with energy. The Drakari hovered in the center, motionless except for their eyes, which glowed brighter as they continued speaking. "Your first trial begins now. You will be divided into teams and tasked with conquering a planetary system. Victory will depend on your ability to lead, strategize, and survive. Failure will not be tolerated." Before Alex could react, a bright light enveloped him, and his surroundings warped. He found himself standing on the surface of a desolate planet, a barren landscape of jagged rock and swirling dust storms. Beside him stood Lydia and a handful of other players he vaguely recognized. They all had the same wide-eyed look of disbelief, but there was no time for hesitation. In the sky above, enormous warships descended, their silhouettes cutting through the clouds. Lydia glanced at him. "We need to move fast. This isn't just about winning, it's about staying alive." Alex nodded. His military training kicked in. This was no different from the battlefields he had once known, except the stakes were far greater. "We'll set up a defensive perimeter and use the terrain to our advantage. There's no telling what we're up against, but we'll need to hold this ground." The others fell into line, their gaming personas stripped away, leaving only raw survival instincts. They scoured the landscape for resources, setting up makeshift fortifications using the alien technology scattered around them. The planet itself seemed hostile, the air thick with a metallic taste and the wind howling like a distant scream. Yet, they pressed on. Hours passed, and the first wave of enemies appeared over the horizon. Massive mech-like creatures lumbered forward, their footsteps shaking the ground. They weren't NPCs, these were real, tangible threats, likely controlled by other players or even the Drakari themselves. Alex's team launched their assault, coordinating strikes with practiced efficiency. Plasma cannons roared to life, cutting down the Mechs as they advanced, but the enemies were relentless. Lydia was beside him, her face set with determination. "This isn't just about defense. We need to take the fight to them. The longer we sit here, the more vulnerable we are." She was right. Alex gathered the group. "We move in an hour. We're going to take that command ship." He pointed to the massive vessel hovering in the distance, its shadow casting a long, ominous line across the battlefield. As they advanced, the weight of the situation bore down on Alex. This wasn't just a test of his tactical prowess, this was life or death. But he thrived under pressure, and his instincts guided him through the chaos. They fought their way through the enemy lines, each step a bloody victory. The closer they got to the command ship, the more intense the resistance became. By the time they reached the ship's perimeter, only a handful of them were left. Alex wiped the sweat and dirt from his brow, his body aching from the relentless combat. He glanced at Lydia, who was holding her side, blood seeping through her armor. "You still with me?" She grimaced but nodded. "Let's finish this." They stormed the command ship, blasting through the entrance with everything they had left. Inside, It was eerily quiet. The hum of the ship's systems was the only sound as they made their way toward the control room. Alex could feel his heart hammering in his chest. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for. The control room doors slid open, revealing a figure standing at the center console. Alex froze. It was Spectre. The mysterious figure turned, a slow smile spreading across their face. "I've been waiting for you." Alex's blood ran cold. "You a broken bar, you're not a player." Spectre chuckled, their voice low and mocking. "No, Alex, I'm far beyond that now. I was once like you, yes, but the Drakari have elevated me. I control far more than just the ship. I control worlds." Lydia raised her weapon, her face twisted in rage. "You betrayed us. You let us think this was just a game." Spectre's eyes glowed with a strange intensity. "It was never just a game. The Drakari are choosing their leaders, and I've already proven myself worthy. Now, it's your turn. Will you join me, or will you fall?" Alex's mind raced. This wasn't a battle he could win with force alone. Spectre had transcended the game, become something more. The only way to survive this was to outthink him. "You're right," Alex said slowly, lowering his weapon. "The Drakari are choosing their leaders. But you haven't won yet." Spectre's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Alex stepped forward, his voice calm. "This is all part of the test, isn't it? The Drakari don't just want warriors. They want rulers. They want someone who can see the bigger picture. Someone who can lead not just with strength, but with wisdom. You're too focused on winning this fight, Spectre. That's why you'll lose." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, Spectre's eyes narrowed. "You think you can outsmart me? You're just a player. You don't understand the stakes here." Alex shook his head. "I understand perfectly. This is about more than just survival. It's about proving that we're capable of leading. And that means knowing when to fight a broken bar and when to negotiate." The room seemed to hold its breath as Alex stared down Spectre, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if this gamble would work, but it was the only chance they had. He could feel the weight of Lydia's eyes on him, waiting, trusting him to make the right move. Spectre hesitated, his gaze flickering between Alex and the control console. The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, Spectre lowered his head. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I've been too focused on the wrong goal." Alex felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. Spectre raised his gaze again, his eyes burning with a new intensity. "But that doesn't mean I'll let you in." In a flash, Spectre moved, his hand flying to the console. Alex shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. The ship's systems roared to life, the walls trembling as the engines powered up. Spectre's laugh echoed through the control room as he activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. "You may have outsmarted me," Spectre hissed, "but you won't survive this." Alex grabbed Lydia's arm, pulling her toward the exit. "We have to go, now." They sprinted through the ship, the walls shuddering as explosions rippled through the structure. Alex's mind raced as he searched for a way out. The hangar bay. If they could reach it in time, they might have a chance. They burst through the hangar doors, the floor vibrating beneath their feet as the ship began to tear itself apart. A small shuttle sat at the far end of the bay, its engines still powered down. Alex cursed under his breath. They didn't have time to start it up. The entire ship was seconds away from detonating. But then, just as all seemed lost, the bay doors opened, and the familiar hum of a hovercraft filled the air. A sleek Drakari vessel swooped in, its pilot gesturing for them to board. Without a second thought, Alex and Lydia leapt into the ship, the bay doors slamming shut behind them as the shuttle rocketed away. The command ship exploded behind them, a blinding flash of light filling the viewport as they sped through space. Alex collapsed into the seat beside Lydia, his chest heaving with exhaustion. They had made it, barely. Lydia looked at him, her face pale but alive. "What now?" Alex stared out at the stars, his mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. "Now a broken bar, we figure out what comes next." The Drakari's test wasn't over. He had survived, but the real challenge had only just begun. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Jackson readjusted his neural interface helmet and leaned back in his chair. The familiar hum of deep space legend enveloped him, and the world around him faded into the cool, metallic atmosphere of his starship's cockpit. The flicker of distant stars filled the screen as the game's system booted up, guiding him through the standard menus. This wasn't just a game to him anymore. It had become an escape, a world where he could push the limits of exploration and feel like more than just a regular guy sitting at a desk in a small apartment. He flexed his virtual hands, feeling the soft hum of the ship's engine through the controls. His character, Captain Jackson in game, was a decorated explorer, known for charting uninhabited worlds, uncovering alien technologies, and outsmarting enemy factions. His ship, the Starhound, had seen it all. But today felt different. There had been rumors in the forums, whispers of strange encounters that weren't part of the official patch notes. Players vanishing, glitches in the game that led to hidden areas no one could explain. Ghost players. It sounded ridiculous, but curiosity had a way of pulling him deeper. Jackson keyed in the coordinates for a planet on the farthest edge of the galaxy map, a forgotten world, its data incomplete. Perfect for what he was looking for. The Starhound jumped into hyperspace, the starfield stretching into lines of light before collapsing into the stillness of deep space. As the ship dropped into orbit, Jackson scanned the surface. Desolate, silent. But there was something there. The sensors picked up an anomaly, an energy signature that shouldn't exist. He smirked to himself. Maybe those forum rumors were onto something. He descended, breaking through the thin atmosphere, landing on a plateau surrounded by jagged cliffs and dust-filled winds. Jackson disembarked, his avatar's boots crunching against the gravelly surface. The HUD in his helmet lit up with various indicators, but the anomaly stood out, a pulsing, bright blue dot in the distance. He started toward it, weaving between rocky outcrops and the ruins of ancient structures, relics of a forgotten alien race. As he approached the source, he saw them, 4 players, standing in a circle, their avatars dressed in high-level gear, far too advanced for the area. One of them, a woman with flowing silver hair and glowing armor, looked directly at him. For a moment, Jackson froze. There was something strange about the way they moved, it too smooth, too deliberate, like they weren't bound by the normal game physics. They didn't appear to be using any mods or hacks. It was something else. Turn back, one of the players, a tall figure cloaked in black, said in a voice that seemed to bypass the usual comms system. You don't belong here. Jackson narrowed his eyes, gripping the virtual rifle slung across his shoulder. Who are you? The woman with silver hair stepped forward. Her nameplate read Allah. You shouldn't have come. This isn't what it seems. Leave now, or you'll regret it. Before Jackson could respond, the group vanished in a shimmer of light, leaving behind nothing but the faint hum of energy dissipating into the air. He stood there, stunned. Players didn't just disappear like that, and not without using teleport mechanics that had cooldowns. He quickly scanned the area for traces of them but came up empty. Whoever they weren't playing by the same rules. Jackson's mind raced as he made his way back to the ship. He needed to dig deeper into this. He opened a private message to Kay, a friend he'd met in the game who was also an expert hacker. If anyone could figure out what was going on, it was Kai. By the time Jackson reached his ship, Kai had already responded. You sure about this? There's nothing in the game's code that should allow players to act like that. I'm telling you, I saw it, Jackson replied. They disappeared without using any of the normal systems. It's like they have some kind of admin access or something. Kai was silent for a moment before sending another message. I'll see what I can find. Meet me at the outpost in Sector 7. I've got a few ideas. Jackson set a course for the outpost, a neutral zone in the game where players could gather, trade, and chat without the risk of PvP combat. It was as close to a social hub as the game got, and it was also where some of the best hackers and modders gathered. If there was a way to access hidden parts of the game, this was the place to find it. When he arrived, Kai was waiting, his avatar leaning against the railing of the station's observation deck. Kai's avatar was as low-key as ever, a simple leather jacket and cargo pants, but Jackson knew better than to underestimate him. "You're not going to like this," Kai said as Jackson approached. "Try me." I dug into the game's backend, and there are parts of the code that aren't just encrypted, they're sealed off, like military-grade stuff. Whatever those players were doing, it's not something normal players can access. It's something built into the game, something the devs didn't put in the patch notes. Jackson's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, sealed off?" "I mean, this isn't a normal game anymore. It's like there's another layer, a layer we're not supposed to see." Jackson leaned over the railing, looking out at the endless expanse of digital space. "You think it's the devs messing with us? Some kind of ARG or secret event?" Kai shook his head. This is something else. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like a broken bar. It wasn't made by humans." The words hung in the air, and for the first time since Jackson started playing Deep Space Legend, he felt a chill run down his spine. Jackson's thoughts swirled as he stared into the endless void of digital space. If Kai was right, then Deep Space Legend was far more than just a game. The idea of something not human being behind this sent a shiver through him. It didn't feel like an alternate reality game, or some kind of secret event. This was bigger. "We need more information," Jackson finally said, his voice steady. "If there's another layer to this game, we've got to figure out what it is and why it's here." Kai smirked. "Already ahead of you. There's a part of the code I couldn't crack, but I've got the lead. The rumors about those ghost players, it goes back to a hidden sector. It's not on any official maps, and it doesn't show up in regular scans, but I'm willing to bet that's where we'll find more of them." Jackson's pulse quickened. This was the break he needed. "How do we get there?" Kai pulled up a star chart. "I've already found the coordinates. It's out in deep space, where most players wouldn't bother going. But if we follow this route, we can slip past the game's usual boundaries and access the sector." Without hesitation, Jackson keyed in the coordinates and jumped back into his ship. The engines of the Starhound roared to life, and in minutes, they were blasting into the blackness of space, leaving the outpost far behind. The stars blurred into streaks as they jumped into hyperspace, the ship's systems humming as they hurtled toward the unknown. Kai patched into the comms from his own ship. "You ready for whatever's out there?" Jackson tightened his grip on the controls. "Ready as I'll ever be." They emerged from hyperspace in an uncharted zone of the galaxy, the in-game map showing nothing but blank space. No planets, no stations, just a void. But in the distance, something flickered. A faint glimmer, like a pulse of light hidden behind layers of shadow. "There," Jackson said, angling the ship toward the source. "That's got to be it." As they approached, the flicker resolved into a massive structure, an ancient space station, unlike anything in the known game world. Its surface was sleek, black, and reflective, with strange geometric patterns that glowed faintly. The station didn't belong to any of the factions in Deep Space Legend. It looked alien, almost organic, as if it had been grown rather than built. Kai whistled over the comms. "That's not in the game's design. This is something else. Something a broken bar off." Jackson brought the Starhound in closer, scanning the station. "No life signs, no activity. It's just a broken bar there." The ship's systems gave no clear readings, but the energy signature was undeniable. This was the anomaly, the place where the mysterious players had come from. He could feel it. "Let's dock," Jackson said, guiding the ship toward a docking port that opened automatically as they approached, as if the station was inviting them in. The airlock hissed as Jackson stepped onto the station's surface. The inside was even stranger than the outside. The walls were covered in shimmering patterns that shifted and changed as he moved, and the air had a faint hum, like the low-frequency vibration of some unseen machine. Kai joined him, his avatar scanning the surroundings. "This doesn't feel like any game asset I've ever seen. It's too a broken bar real." Jackson approached a console that lit up as he neared. Strange symbols danced across the screen, but after a moment, they morphed into English. "Welcome, subject." Jackson froze, reading the words again. "Subject?" That was no typical game greeting. Kai stepped up beside him, his eyes wide. "Subject? These a broken bar. This isn't just a game, Jackson. It's some kind of experiment." The realization hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. The players were test subjects. But for what? And why? Before he could respond, a voice echoed through the station, soft but commanding. "You've come far, human. But this is only the beginning." Jackson spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. But there was no one there. The voice wasn't coming from a player, it was from the station itself. "Who are you?" Jackson demanded. "What is this place?" The voice responded calmly. "This is a proving ground. Your species has been chosen for observation. The simulation you call Deep Space Legend is more than a game. It is a tool, an arena in which we test your capabilities." Kai cursed under his breath. "This whole thing a broken bar, it's been a setup." The voice continued. "You and the others were selected based on your potential. Your actions in the game have determined your worth. We have been watching." Jackson's mind raced. "So, what are we? Lab rats in some alien experiment?" "Not lab rats," the voice corrected. "Candidates. The most capable of your kind are given the chance to prove their value. Some have passed the tests and been granted power. Others have failed and been discarded." Alla's words flashed through Jackson's mind. This isn't just a game. She'd known. The mysterious players, were they the ones who had passed the tests? Had they been given powers beyond the game's normal limits because of it? "What do you want from us?" Jackson asked, his voice tense. "We want to see if your species is worthy of joining us." The voice replied. "We are the Voranax. Our civilization spans galaxies, and we seek allies who can match our intellect and abilities. But only the strongest, the most resourceful, will be chosen." Kai looked at Jackson, fear and excitement warring in his expression. "If we're not worthy?" The voice didn't hesitate. "Then you will be eliminated." Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. This was more than he bargained for. The game, the mysterious players, the alien station, it was all part of a larger test, one that determined the fate of everyone involved. But Jackson wasn't about to back down. If they wanted a test, he'd give them one. "What do we have to do?" The console lit up again, displaying a series of symbols that quickly transformed into familiar shape as puzzles, combat challenges, strategy simulations, each one more complex than the last. "You will face trials," the voice said. "Prove your worth, and you may survive. Fail, and you will be erased." Jackson glanced at Kai. "You in?" Kai grinned. "Always." They stepped forward, ready to face the unknown. The first trial appeared before them, an arena filled with mechanical drones, each one armed with advanced weaponry. Jackson's HUD flared to life, displaying his health and ammo reserves. This was no ordinary in-game challenge. The difficulty had been cranked up to a level far beyond what they'd ever encountered before. The drones activated, their glowing red eyes locking onto Jackson and Kai as they darted across the arena. Jackson fired, his shots precise and calculated, but the drones were fast, moving with inhuman agility. He barely dodged a laser blast aimed at his head, diving behind a barrier. Kai hacked into the arena's systems, trying to disable the drone's targeting, but the AI was too advanced, adapting to every move they made. "This is insane!" Kai shouted, ducking under a volley of missiles. Jackson gritted his teeth, firing back with everything he had. "We've got to keep going." For what felt like hours, they fought, pushing themselves to the limit. But slowly, they began to gain the upper hand. The drone's movements became more predictable, their patterns easier to read. Jackson and Kai worked in perfect sync, their combined skills making them a formidable force. Finally, the last drone fell, its metal shell collapsing in a heap of sparks. The arena dissolved around them, and the voice returned. "Impressive. You have passed the first trial. But there is more to come." Jackson wiped the sweat from his brow. "We're ready." The station shifted, the walls sliding away to reveal a massive chamber filled with puzzles, each one more intricate and complex than the last. It was a test of intellect, strategy, and teamwork. They worked through the puzzles with determination, solving one after the other, the challenges growing increasingly difficult. Every time they succeeded, the station adjusted, creating new obstacles to test them. Hours passed, but Jackson refused to give up. He could feel the weight of the Vornix's gaze upon him, watching, judging. He wouldn't let them win, he wouldn't let them decide his fate. When the final puzzle was completed, the voice returned. "You have proven your resourcefulness, your species has potential. But there is one last trial." The ground beneath them shifted, and they found themselves standing on the edge of a massive chasm, a dark, swirling void at the center. In the middle of the void stood a figura. She looked at Jackson with a mix of sorrow and determination. "I warned you, now you must face me." Jackson's heart sank. Ala wasn't just another player. She was the final test. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The city was a sprawling, shining jewel in the daylight, but at night, its underbelly revealed a darker truth. Skyscrapers reached for the stars, their glass facades reflecting lights that flickered across every inch of the concrete jungle. But beneath that polished exterior lay a labyrinth of corruption, a place where power was wielded by those willing to do anything to keep it. And it was into this murky world that Alex Carter was about to be thrust. Alex had once believed in the potential of his city. Fresh out of college, brimming with idealism, he had taken a job at Genetic Labs, one of the leading biotech firms in the country. He was a biochemist, a sharp mind with a knack for innovation. But over the years, that spark had dimmed. He'd seen too much compromise, too many deals made in the shadows. Projects had come and gone, many of them dubious, funded by sources that weren't public. He kept his head down, hoping to avoid the inevitable fallout when the truth would finally surface. But it was only a matter of time. The night it all changed for Alex began like any other. Late in the lab, the hum of machinery filling the air, he sat hunched over his workstation. The lab was mostly deserted, only a few night shift workers remained. Alex was in the middle of sequencing DNA from one of the lab's newest projects, a genetically modified spider. The higher-ups had said it was a step toward curing disease, toward finding answers that nature had long kept hidden. But something about it felt off. There was a darkness in the air, a sensation he couldn't shake. Suddenly, alarms blared, breaking the silence. Red lights flashed, and the automated voice echoed through the halls. "Security breach. All personnel evacuate immediately." Alex shot up from his seat, panic creeping into his chest. He grabbed his things, but before he could make it out of the lab, the door slammed shut, locking him inside. Confused and frantic, he slammed his fist against the reinforced glass, but it didn't budge. He glanced back at his workstation, the spider specimens still locked in their containment units until one wasn't. A sharp, stinging pain shot up his arm. He looked down, horrified, to see a spider, grotesquely large, latched onto his hand. Its body was a sickly green, legs twitching as its fangs sunk deeper into his flesh. Alex swatted it away, crushing it underfoot, but the damage was done. His hand pulsed with pain, his vision blurred. He stumbled backward, clutching the lab table for support as the world spun around him. Within moments, his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the cold floor, gasping for breath as darkness overtook him. When Alex woke, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. His head pounded, and his body felt different. He groaned, slowly pushing himself to his feet. The lab was empty, silent now, the alarms long gone. The strange sensation in his body persisted, an unfamiliar weightlessness. He flexed his hand where the spider had bitten him. The skin was tender, but the pain had faded. But more than that, he felt stronger, his reflexes sharper. It was as if his muscles had been rewired, his entire being heightened in ways he couldn't explain. Stumbling out of the lab, Alex made his way home, his mind racing. Maybe it was a fever dream. Maybe the spider's venom had messed with his head. But deep down, he knew something had changed. He could feel it in his bones. That night, the dreams came. He saw webs, vast and intricate, stretching across the city like a map. Spiders crawled through every corner, lurking in the dark, watching from the shadows. And in the center of it all was a figure, a faceless being who controlled the web with a flick of his fingers, ensnaring the city in his grasp. When Alex woke, drenched in sweat, he knew the dreams weren't just nightmares. They were something more. Over the next few days, the changes became impossible to ignore. Alex found himself scaling the walls of his apartment without effort, his body instinctively adapting to the vertical surfaces. His hands could produce thin, silk-like threads, which he could manipulate with ease. At first, it terrified him. But as the days passed, he began to embrace it. There was something exhilarating about swinging through the city's skyline, feeling the wind whip against his face as he moved with the grace of a predator. But with his newfound powers came a sense of responsibility. The city was sick, rotting from the inside out, and Alex was beginning to see the root of it all. The crime syndicate that controlled the city's underground had its claws deep in every aspect of life, from the politicians to the police force. Nothing was free from their grasp, and they were using the very same genetically engineered spiders that had given Alex his abilities to maintain their stranglehold on the population. It didn't take long for Alex to find out who was at the center of it all, a man known only as the Weaver. He was the head of the syndicate, a ghost who moved through the city's power structures unseen, controlling everything from behind the scenes. And he had an army of spiders, thousands of them, bred in secret labs, weaponized to enforce his will. They prowled the city's underground, enforcing the Weaver's law with venom and fear. Alex knew he couldn't fight this alone. He needed allies, people who were willing to fight back against the syndicate's reign of terror. That's when he met Jessica. Jessica was a hacker, one of the best in the city. She worked with a group of renegade activists, people who had seen the corruption firsthand and were determined to take it down. They had been monitoring genetic labs for months, knowing that something sinister was happening beneath the surface. When Alex showed up at their doorstep, showing them what he could do, they were skeptical at first. But after a demonstration of his ability as scaling a wall in seconds, spinning a web strong enough to catch a falling brick, they realized he was exactly what they needed. Together, they hatched a plan. Jessica had access to files that could expose the Weaver's entire operation. If they could get their hands on the files, they could blow the whole thing wide open, forcing the authorities to act. But getting the files wasn't going to be easy. The Weaver's lair was buried deep beneath the city, hidden in a maze of tunnels and abandoned subway lines. It was a fortress, guarded by his spider army and his most loyal lieutenants. Alex knew it was a suicide mission, but he also knew it was their only chance. The night they moved in, the city was unusually quiet. Alex led the way, swinging through the darkened streets as Jessica and her team followed below. The entrance to the Weaver's lair was hidden in an old, forgotten subway station, its tunnels long abandoned by the public. But as they descended into the darkness, the sound of skittering legs echoed off the walls. The spiders were everywhere. Alex fought his way through them, his webs tangling with theirs in a deadly dance. Every step forward was met with resistance, but he pushed on, determined to reach the heart of the operation. He could feel the Weaver's presence growing stronger, like a dark cloud hanging over the city. As Alex moved deeper into the lair, the walls seemed to close in, the air thick with a scent of decay and dampness. The tunnels twisted and turned, an endless maze that mirrored the web in his dreams. Each step forward felt heavier, but he pressed on, driven by the need to end the Weaver's reign. The skittering of spider legs grew louder, more frequent, and it wasn't long before he found himself face to face with them. They were monstrosities spiders. Unlike the one that had bitten him, these creatures were engineered for war. Their exoskeletons glistened under the dim lights, and their fangs dripped with venom that could melt through steel. Alex barely had time to react as one lunged at him, its legs a blur. Instinctively, he spun a web between his hands and slung it toward the creature, catching it midair. The spider thrashed, trying to free itself, but Alex yanked hard, sending it crashing against the tunnel wall. Before he could catch his breath, two more came from the shadows, their pincers clicking menacingly. He dodged the first one, using the wall to propel himself over the second. His body moved with a grace and speed that still amazed him. These powers, once a curse, were now his greatest asset. He spun midair, shooting web after web, trapping the spiders in a sticky cocoon. But he knew they were only the beginning. The real threat was waiting ahead. He glanced over his shoulder, checking on Jessica and the others. They had taken cover, using whatever they could find to barricade themselves from the onslaught of spiders. They weren't fighters, they were hackers, strategists. But they believed in the mission, and that gave them courage. Alex nodded to Jessica, signaling her to keep moving forward. The tunnels began to widen as they approached the core of the layer. The walls, once crumbling and old, now had a sleek, metallic finish. They were getting closer to the Weaver. Alex could feel it. His heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The closer they got, the more his senses sharpened. The Weaver was here, somewhere in this labyrinth, waiting for him. Then, out of the darkness, came a voice, smooth, calm, and dripping with malice. "You've come a long way, Alex." "I'm impressed." The sound reverberated off the tunnel walls, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. Alex froze, every muscle tensed. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. "You think you can stop this? You think your little powers make you special?" The voice echoed again. "I made you, Alex. You're just another piece in my web." Alex clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. He knew the Weaver was trying to rattle him, but it wouldn't work. He had come too far to be deterred by empty threats. "I don't need to be special to stop you," Alex growled, his voice steady. "I just need to be better than you." A low chuckle filled the air, and suddenly, the walls around him came alive with movement. Spiders poured out from every crevice, their eyes glowing red in the dim light. They moved as one, like an army following orders. And then, from the shadows, the Weaver emerged. He was taller than Alex had imagined, his body lean and angular, almost spider-like in its movements. His face was obscured by a mask, but his eyes shone with a predatory gleam. He wore a long, black coat that seemed to ripple with every step, and in his hands, he held a control mechanism for the spider army. "I've ruled this city for years," the Weaver said, his voice cold. "You think you can just walk in here and take that from me?" "I'm not here to take anything," Alex replied. "I'm here to end you." With a flick of his wrist, Alex shot a web toward the Weaver, but the man was faster than he appeared. He dodged to the side, moving with unnatural speed. In an instant, the Weaver activated his control device, and the spider army lunged. Alex fought with everything he had. His webs flew in every direction, trapping spiders left and right. He swung from the ceiling, dodging their venomous strikes, but they just kept coming. No matter how many he took down, more replaced them. The lair felt like it was closing in around him, the walls dripping with spiders. He had to get to the Weaver. That was the only way this would end. He leapt over the swarm, landing just a few feet from the Weaver. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled beneath his mask, as if this was all part of some grand plan. "You're too late, Alex," the Weaver said, his voice full of confidence. "The city is mine. You'll never be able to stop it." Alex narrowed his eyes. "Watch me." In a burst of speed, Alex lunged at the Weaver, his fists wrapped in webbing. The two clashed, their movements a blur of combat and acrobatics. The weaver was faster than Alex had anticipated, but Alex's newfound strength and agility gave him an edge. He dodged the weaver's attacks, countering with blows of his own. For a moment, it seemed like Alex might actually win, but the weaver wasn't done yet. With a quick motion, he activated a hidden trap in the lair, and the floor beneath Alex's feet gave way. He fell into a pit, the walls slick with webbing, and as he struggled to climb out, the weaver loomed over him. "You should have stayed in your lab, Alex," the weaver said, his voice dripping with mockery. "This is bigger than you. You can't fight progress." Alex gritted his teeth, refusing to give up. He could feel the weight of the spiders crawling toward him, their legs skittering along the edges of the pit. But he wasn't done yet. He still had one last trick up his sleeve. With a deep breath, Alex focused on the webbing in his hands. He had been experimenting with his powers, learning how to manipulate the webs in new ways. Now was the time to put it all to the test. He spun his web faster than ever before, weaving it into a thick, impenetrable shield around him. The spiders couldn't break through it, their fangs useless against the reinforced silk. Alex used the web as a springboard, launching himself out of the pit and back into the fight. The weaver's eyes widened in surprise as Alex came hurtling toward him. This time, there was no hesitation. Alex grabbed the weaver by the collar, lifting him off the ground with a strength that surprised even him. "It's over," Alex said, his voice steady. "You're done." The weaver struggled, but it was no use. Alex spun a web around him, binding his arms and legs in place. With one final, powerful move, Alex slammed the weaver against the control device, smashing it to pieces. The spiders, now free from the weaver's control, scattered, retreating into the shadows. The fight was over. As Alex stood over the weaver's broken form, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The city was free. The weaver's reign of terror had ended. But Alex knew this was just the beginning. The city was still sick, its foundations rotted with corruption. There were others like the weaver, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to take control. As he walked out of the lair, Jessica and the others joined him. They had survived, barely, but they had won. The files they had recovered would expose the weaver's entire operation, forcing the authorities to act. For now, the city was safe. But Alex knew he couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not when there was still work to be done. The skyline stretched out before him, a sea of lights and steel. He stood at the edge of the city, the wind whipping through his hair, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He wasn't a scientist anymore. He wasn't just a man. He was the city's protector, and the web was his to spin. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Dr. Ethan Drake crouched low in the dimly lit cave, the only light coming from the thin beam of his headlamp. The air smelled of wet earth, metallic and damp, mixed with the faint odor of decaying vegetation. He held a small, metallic device in his hand, scanning the strange formations that dotted the cave walls. His heart pounded with anticipation, the quiet thrill of discovery humming through his veins. "This has to be it," he whispered to himself, adjusting his grip on the scanner. The readings were like nothing he'd seen before. No known organism has this kind of biological signature. The planet, isolated on the far edge of the star system, was rich in life forms unknown to the rest of humanity. Sent here by the Central Galactic Science Coalition to research and document these alien species, Ethan had always known there was something different about this world. But even he hadn't expected to stumble upon something so extraordinary. Suddenly, the scanner beeped as sharp and insistent. Ethan's pulse quickened. He turned slowly toward the source of the signal, his eyes narrowing at a dark, web-like structure nestled in a crevice between two massive rocks. It was nearly invisible, its strands shimmering faintly when the light from his headlamp caught them at just the right angle. "Gotcha," he muttered, stepping forward. As he moved closer, a small, spider-like creature darted out from the center of the web. Ethan froze, instinctively holding his breath. The creature was unlike anything he'd seen. Its legs were long and spindly, its body covered in a glossy black exoskeleton. It stared at him, its 8 red eyes glowing eerily in the darkness. Before Ethan could react, the creature leapt at him with astonishing speed. He barely had time to flinch before it latched onto his wrist, its tiny legs clinging tightly to his skin. He tried to shake it off, but it was too late. The creature's body seemed to melt into his skin, disappearing as if it had been absorbed. Ethan stumbled back, his mind reeling. What the hell just happened? His wrist tingled, and then a sharp, burning sensation shot up his arm. He gritted his teeth, dropping the scanner as he clutched his forearm. The pain intensified, spreading through his veins like wildfire, and for a moment, he thought he was going to pass out. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the pain subsided. Ethan gasped, his breath ragged. He staggered to his feet, his eyes wide with disbelief. His wrist looked normal, unmarked, as if nothing had happened. But something was different. He could feel it. The cave seemed brighter now, the details of the rocks and the formations more vivid. His senses were sharper, more attuned. Even the air tasted different, more metallic. His body felt lighter, stronger, more agile than it had ever been. What the hell was this thing? Ethan knew he should head back to the base and report the incident, but a part of him hesitated. This was the discovery of a lifetime. Whatever that creature was, it had given him something extraordinary. He flexed his fingers, feeling the power coursing through him. His grip felt stronger, more controlled. He clenched his fist, watching the muscles in his arm ripple beneath his skin, more defined than ever before. Whatever the creature had done to him, he wasn't the same man who had walked into this cave. And then the thought crept into his mind, unbidden, but undeniable. What else can I do now? Ethan returned to the base under the cover of darkness. The facility, hidden deep within the planet's jungle, was designed to be a low-profile research station, avoiding any attention from the more hostile inhabitants of the planet. As the doors slid shut behind him, he made a beeline for his private lab. His mind was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the creature had fundamentally changed him. He had to know more. He began running tests on him: for blood work, tissue samples, neurological scans. The results were shocking. His muscle density had increased by nearly 20%. His reaction time had doubled. His eyesight had improved, as had his sense of smell and hearing. It was as if every aspect of his biology had been enhanced. But the most disturbing discovery was the presence of foreign DNA interwoven with his own. The parasite had integrated itself into his genetic structure, altering his very being. Ethan stared at the data, a mixture of awe and dread settling in his chest. He had always dreamed of finding something that could revolutionize human biology, something that could push humanity beyond its natural limits. But these a broken bar. This was something else entirely. He flexed his fingers again, watching the way his skin shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. The changes were happening faster than he had anticipated. I need more time, he thought, pacing the lab. He wasn't ready to share this discovery, not yet. The implications were too great. If the coalition found out, they would take over, and the parasite would be out of his control. But then, just as he began to formulate a plan, the alarms blared. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The lights flickered, and a computerized voice echoed through the facility. Warning: unauthorized entry detected. All personnel, report to the safe zone. Ethan's mind raced. The base was supposed to be secure. There was no way anyone could have breached it without setting off the early detection systems. Unless his blood ran cold. He knew who it was. The Zathari, the alien race, had been scouring this sector of space for years, known for their brutal conquests and insatiable hunger for power. They had long coveted the resources of this planet, and now it seemed they had finally made their move. Ethan grabbed his research notes, stuffing them into his bag. There was no time to lose. If the Zathari got their hands on the parasite, they would weaponize it, turning it into a tool of destruction. The ground shook as explosions echoed in the distance. Ethan ran through the corridors, his enhanced speed allowing him to outpace the other scientists scrambling for the safe zone. He needed to get out now. But as he reached the exit, he hesitated. The parasite, he couldn't leave it behind. If the Zathari found the cave, they would take it for themselves, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Ethan turned on his heel, heading back toward the cave. The jungle was ablaze with gunfire and energy blasts as Ethan made his way through the dense foliage. The Zathari had already begun their assault, their forces advancing quickly toward the base. He could see their sleek, metallic ships hovering in the distance, their engines glowing with an otherworldly light. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, not just from the danger but from the raw power coursing through his veins. Every movement felt more precise, more controlled, as if the parasite had unlocked a deeper, more primal part of his mind. He reached the cave, his breath ragged, and descended into its depths once more. The webs were still there, untouched, shimmering faintly in the dim light. But the creature that had infected him was gone. Ethan felt a strange pang of disappointment. He had hoped to study it further, to understand more about what it had done to him. But there was no time. The Zathari would be on him any moment. He turned to leave, but then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A Zathari soldier, clad in sleek, black armor, stood at the mouth of the cave, its glowing blue eyes locked onto him. Behind it, more soldiers emerged, their weapons raised, ready to strike. Ethan's mind raced. He had no way to fight them off, not without revealing what he had become. But then, almost instinctively, his body reacted. Before he even realized what was happening, Ethan leapt into the air, his enhanced strength propelling him upward. His hands shot out, and to his astonishment, he clung to the cave wall, his fingers digging into the rock with ease. The Zathari fired, but Ethan was already on the move, scurrying along the wall like a spider, dodging their blasts with terrifying agility. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and exhilaration. The parasite had given him more power than he had imagined, a power that was now surging uncontrollably through him. With a sudden burst of speed, Ethan launched himself from the wall, landing behind the Zathari soldiers. He moved without thinking, his body acting on instinct. In a blur of motion, he dispatched the first soldier with a single, powerful strike to the neck. The second soldier fell just as quickly, his weapon clattering to the ground as Ethan tore through him with frightening precision. He stood over their bodies, breathing heavily, his heart racing with adrenaline. But as the rush of battle faded, a sinking feeling crept into his chest. What had he just done? Ethan stared down at the Zathari soldiers he had just killed. The blood on his hands felt thick and warm, but it was his shaking fingers that disturbed him the most. He hadn't just killed Ama, he'd torn through them, his actions fueled by something far more primal than strategy or self-defense. He wasn't himself anymore, not completely. The parasite's influence was growing, slipping into his mind, guiding his movements with a sharp and deadly instinct. Wiping his hands against his pants, he felt the urge to flee, to run as far as he could from the Zathari, from the base, from everything that could provoke this thing inside him. But there was no time to reflect. More of the alien soldiers would soon follow, and his position was no longer secure. He moved quickly through the cave, his thoughts scattered between the immediate threat of the Zathari and the battle he was now waging internally. The parasite, once a scientific marvel to him, was becoming more than a tool, it was becoming part of him, and it craved control. Every movement, every decision, seemed to stem from the ever-growing spider-like instincts that simmered beneath the surface. He didn't want to admit it, but he could feel the hunger gnawing at him. The distant explosions and the sounds of battle continued to echo through the jungle as he made his way back to the base. The facility was in ruins now, large sections of the perimeter broken down and smoking from the relentless assault. He saw the bodies of his colleagues strewn about, some caught mid-escape, others gunned down while defending the last vestiges of their research. Ethan's chest tightened as guilt weighed heavily on him. He should have been here, helping them. But instead, he was hiding in caves, battling his own monstrous transformation. The power coursing through him, it could have saved them, yet the fear of what he was becoming had held him back. As he reached the facility, he caught sight of a group of survivors holed up near a bunker entrance. They were trapped, pinned down by Zathari forces that had set up a perimeter. Without thinking, Ethan moved toward them, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He sprinted low and fast across the scorched ground, moving like a shadow through the wreckage. In the blink of an eye, he was among the Zathari soldiers, striking with the same terrifying precision as before. His hands stronger and quicker than any human's, snapped necks, crushed weapons, and disabled them with brutal efficiency. When the last soldier fell, the surviving scientists emerged from their cover, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Ethan?" one of them whispered, recognizing him. "How did you?" But he didn't answer. He couldn't. The instincts were still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the chance to take over again. He looked at his bloodied hands, realizing just how far he'd already crossed the line. Without another word, he turned away from them, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could stop the transformation before it was too late. The survivors watched him go, too stunned to follow. As Ethan moved deeper into the jungle, he could feel the parasite's influence growing. It wasn't just enhancing his physical abilities anymore, it was altering his thoughts, pushing him toward darker, more violent impulses. His mind kept flashing back to the way he had killed those soldiers, to the ease with which he had dispatched them. Part of him felt disgusted, but another part growing more dominant with each passing momenta felt something disturbingly close to satisfaction. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. The Zathari were relentless in their pursuit. Even as he fled from the base, their ships scoured the skies, hunting for any survivors. He could hear the faint whir of their drones in the distance, scanning the jungle for signs of human life. Ethan knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, they would find him, and when they did, he wasn't sure woe or what he would be. It wasn't long before they caught up to him. As Ethan made his way through a thick patch of trees, a sharp, mechanical sound sliced through the air. A drone, hovering above the canopy. Ethan's body tensed, his senses sharper than ever. He could hear the faint hum of its engines, the subtle shift in the air as it passed overhead. He had seconds to react before it alerted the rest of the Zathari forces. Without thinking, Ethan leapt into the nearest tree, his hands and feet gripping the bark with a strength that should have been impossible. He scaled the tree in seconds, moving with the effortless grace of a predator. The drone whirred just above him, scanning the jungle floor for signs of movement. Ethan crouched low on a branch, waiting for the right moment. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, he launched himself into the air, his hand latching onto the drone's sleek, metallic surface. The machine jerked violently, trying to shake him off, but Ethan's grip was ironclad. With a quick twist, he ripped open its casing, exposing the delicate circuitry inside. One final blow, and the drone plummeted to the ground in a shower of sparks. He landed silently on the forest floor, the adrenaline still pulsing through his veins. But as the rush of victory faded, the familiar sense of unease returned. That wasn't him up 3, that was the parasite. It was growing stronger, its influence on him undeniable. He needed to find a way to control it, to keep it from taking over completely. But how? As he pondered his next move, Ethan heard a distant rumbly, a Zathari transport, no doubt alerted to the drone's destruction. His time was running out. He needed to get as far away from the Zathari forces as possible, and fast. But with the parasite inside him growing stronger, every second was a battle between survival and control. The jungle stretched on ahead of him, vast and unforgiving. Ethan knew that if he didn't find a solution soon, he wouldn't just be fighting the Zathari, he'd be fighting himself. He pushed on, his enhanced body allowing him to move quickly and quietly through the dense foliage. But the further he went, the more the lines between man and parasite began to blur. His thoughts became fragmented, flashes of primal instincts mixing with his own reasoning. Hunger, strength, power. The parasite was feeding him these thoughts, urging him to embrace its gifts, and with every step, it became harder to resist. Suddenly, Ethan heard something that stopped him in his tracks. The faint sound of voices, human voices. He crept closer, his heightened senses guiding him through the trees until he reached a small clearing. There, huddled together in the center of the clearing, was a group of survivors, scientists and soldiers, bruised and battered, but alive. His heart ached at the sight of them. These were his people, the ones he had sworn to protect. But as he watched from the shadows, he felt the parasite stir within him, its hunger growing. It didn't see them as people, it saw them as prey. Ethan gritted his teeth, fighting back the urge to attack. He wasn't a monster, he wouldn't let the parasite turn him into one. But as the seconds ticked by, the battle inside him grew fiercer. He stepped forward, his body tense with the effort of maintaining control. The survivors looked up, their eyes wide with fear and hope. "Dr. Drake?" one of them asked, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" Ethan nodded, though his throat felt tight. He could feel the parasite's influence growing stronger by the second, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control now, and not when they needed him most. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and steady. "The Zethari are close." The survivors nodded, too desperate to question him. They gathered their belongings quickly, falling in line behind him as he led them through the jungle. Every step was torture, the parasite's instincts whispering in his ear, urging him to give in, to let go. But Ethan held on, clinging to the last remnants of his humanity with every ounce of strength he had left. As they made their way through the dense foliage, Ethan kept his senses on high alert, scanning for any sign of Zethari forces. He could feel the tension in the group behind him, their fear palpable in the air. But what frightened him most was the realization that they weren't just afraid of the Zethria, they were afraid of him. And in a way, they were right to be. The jungle began to thin, the trees giving way to a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley below. In the distance, Ethan could see the Zethari ships, their sleek, metallic hulls gleaming in the fading light. They were regrouping, preparing for another assault. But as he watched them from his vantage point, a new thought crept into his mind, an idea so dangerous, so reckless, that it took his breath away. What if he didn't fight the parasite? What if he let it take over, just for a little while? He could use its power to take down the Zethari, to end this invasion once and for all. The thought was intoxicating, a seductive whisper in the back of his mind. He could feel the parasite's excitement at the prospect, its hunger for violence growing stronger. But at what cost? Ethan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He couldn't risk it. If he let the parasite take over, there might be no coming back. He would lose himself completely, becoming little more than a mindless creature, driven by instinct and hunger. But if he didn't do something soon, the Zethari would win. They would destroy everything and everyone. Ethan closed his eyes, his mind racing. He had no good options, no clear path forward. But one thing was certain, whatever happened next, he couldn't do it alone. The survivors gathered around him, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "What do we do now?" one of them asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan opened his eyes, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a vice. "We fight," he said quietly, his voice laced with determination. "But not like this, not while I'm still in control." The final battle was coming, and Ethan knew that when it did, he would have to make the hardest choice of his life. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The sky had never looked the same since the web appeared. Ethan stood at the edge of the city, gazing up at the vast structure that blotted out the horizon. It stretched for miles, a complex latticework of dark metal and organic matter that pulsed with an eerie, mechanical life. From below, it looked like a monstrous spider's web covering the earth, but everyone knew better. This wasn't some natural formation. It was a creation, a part machine, part biological, and all-consuming. The web, as they called it, had changed everything. When it first appeared, humanity tried to resist, to fight back with all the weapons at their disposal. But they soon realized the web wasn't just a physical threat, it was a system, a network that linked every creature within it, controlled by an intelligence far beyond their understanding. The Web Lord, a name whispered in fear among survivors, ruled this biomechanical empire with ruthless efficiency. Ethan sighed, his fingers brushing the rough surface of the metal railing in front of him. Life had become a cycle of survival. He fixed broken tech in the city's remains, scavenged for food, and kept his head down. It was easier that way, avoiding attention from both the web and the remnants of the human military, who were barely hanging on themselves. The web's mechanical spiders, half living, half robotic abominations, patrolled the outskirts of the city. Anyone caught venturing too far was never seen again. But Ethan wasn't content. There was a restlessness inside him, a pull toward something greater, though he had no idea what it was. That restlessness brought him here, to the fringes of the city. He was supposed to be fixing a broken power generator, an easy enough task, but something had caught his eye, a shimmer, barely visible, just beyond the city's border. Curious, Ethan left his tools behind and ventured closer. His heart pounded as he crossed into the no man's land, his breath catching in his throat when he realized he had stepped too far. He was beyond the protection of the city's anti-web barriers now, a place where even the air felt hostile. The shimmer moved. Ethan blinked, rubbing his eyes. It wasn't just his imagination. There, right in front of him, the air seemed to ripple, distorting like heat waves. He hesitated, instinct telling him to turn back, but something deeper, something primal, urged him forward. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they grazed the edge of the anomaly. In an instant, the world changed. Ethan's body was yanked forward, as if a hook had sunk into his chest and pulled him through the fabric of reality. He gasped, feeling his surroundings shift. The air grew thick, metallic, and the ground beneath him softened, becoming strange, sticky. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer standing at the city's edge. He was inside the web. The world around him pulsed with an otherworldly glow. Thick cables, both mechanical and organic, wove through the landscape like arteries, their surfaces crawling with spider-like creatures. The air buzzed with a low hum, and the sky was a dark, oppressive dome of interlocking web structures. Panic surged through Ethan. What had he done? He looked around wildly, searching for some way to escape, but there was none. The web enveloped everything, stretching out as far as his eyes could see. Then he felt an odd sensation, like a pulse of energy running through his veins. It started in his fingertips and spread through his body, making his skin tingle. He gasped, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of the feeling. He could feel the web, as if it were alive, responding to his presence. His mind reached out, instinctively, and the world around him shifted. A nearby section of the webbing bent to his will. It twisted and coiled, obeying his unspoken command. "What the hell, a broken bar?" he whispered, stumbling back. His mind reeled with the implications. He could control the web. Somehow, in this strange place, he had power. A high-pitched screech echoed in the distance, and Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. It was the sound of the web's mechanical spiders, its soldiers on the hunt. They had sensed him. Heart pounding, Ethan ran. He didn't know where he was going, but he had to move. The terrain beneath him shifted unnaturally, parts of it seemingly alive, moving of their own accord. His boots sank into the webbing as he sprinted, the sound of his own breath loud in his ears. The screeches grew louder, closer, and he risked a glance over his shoulder. They were there, just as he feared, the mechanical spiders, each the size of a large dog, their metallic legs clattering against the ground as they swarmed toward him. Their eyes glowed a sickly red, and their bodies, a grotesque fusion of organic tissue and steel, glistened in the dim light. Ethan's mind raced. He had no weapons, no way to defend himself except for the power he had just discovered. Desperation surged through him, and he stretched out his hand, willing the web to respond. The ground beneath the spiders twisted, and thick strands of webbing shot up, entangling their legs. They screeched in fury, struggling to free themselves, but the web held them fast. Ethan didn't stop to think. He kept running, his newfound power keeping the spiders at bay, though he had no idea how long he could maintain control. The strain was already beginning to show. His muscles ached, and his mind felt stretched thin, as if the web was pulling at him, trying to claim him as its own. He didn't know how long he ran, but eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded. Exhausted, he collapsed against a nearby structure of some kind of pillar made of interwoven cables and organic matter. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath, his mind reeling from everything that had just happened. "What is this place?" he muttered to himself. "You're in the heart of the web," a voice said from the shadows. Ethan jumped, turning to see a figure emerge from behind one of the pillars. It was a woman, her face partially obscured by a hood, but her eyes as sharp, calculating were visible in the dim light. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, pushing himself to his feet. "The better question," she said, her voice calm, "is who are you?" Ethan frowned. "I don't know what you mean." The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You're not like the others. You shouldn't be able to control the web, yet here you are." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't know how I did it. It just a broken bar happened." The woman sighed. "Then you're even more dangerous than I thought." Before Ethan could respond, she reached out, her hand glowing with an odd, faint light. Ethan instinctively recoiled, but the woman placed her palm against his chest, and the glow spread through him. For a moment, he felt a surge of warmth, a strange sensation that calmed his racing heart. Then it faded. "You've been marked," she said quietly, her voice almost sad. "The web lord knows you're here now. He'll come for you." Ethan's stomach twisted in fear. "The web lord?" The woman nodded. "He controls all of this. The spiders, the web, even the air you breathe. If he wants you dead, there's no escaping it." Ethan's mind raced. He had heard stories of the web lord, of course, but they had always seemed distant, like something out of a nightmare. Now, he realized how real the threat was. "Then what do I do?" he asked, his voice shaking. The woman hesitated for a moment, then said, "You learn to control it completely. If you're going to survive, you need to understand the web's power, and how to use it." Ethan looked at her, confused. "And you can teach me?" "I can help," she said, though her expression remained guarded. "But you'll have to trust me." Trust her? Ethan barely knew her, but what choice did he have? He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it." The woman's expression softened, just slightly. "Good. My name is Nia. We don't have much time. The web lord won't wait forever." Ethan followed Nia through the twisting landscape of the web, his mind racing with questions. The web was alive in ways he could never have imagined it, constantly shifting, constantly watching. The power he had discovered both terrified and fascinated him. Every step he took, he could feel the connection to the web pulsing beneath his feet, a strange energy that hummed through his veins. Nia moved quickly and silently, her eyes darting around as if she expected danger at any moment. She was clearly used to this place, navigating the maze of webbing and structures with ease. Ethan struggled to keep up, his thoughts still caught on her words. "The web lord knows you're here now." It was a chilling thought, and the idea of being hunted by something so powerful sent a shiver down his spine. As they walked, Ethan noticed the way Nia interacted with the environment. Like him, she seemed to have some control over the web. Occasionally, she would reach out, touching a strand of webbing, and it would shift or part, creating a path for them to pass. It was subtle, but it was clear that she had experience with this world and its strange power. "How did you learn to control it?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Nia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Trial and error. Mostly error. The web doesn't take kindly to outsiders trying to manipulate it. I've been here a long time, longer than I care to remember. Ethan frowned. But you said the web lord he controls everything here. How can we fight against that? Naya's lips pressed into a thin line. The web lord's power is vast, but not absolute. The web is a system, a network. Like any system, it has vulnerabilities, weak points. If you know where to look, you can exploit them. She paused, looking at him with a strange intensity. That's why you're so important, Ethan. You have a connection to the web that's different from anyone else. I don't know why, but you can access parts of it that even I can't. Ethan shook his head. I don't even understand how I'm doing it. I'm just a broken bar reacting. You're reacting because the web responds to you. You can feel it, can't you? That pull, that sense of broken bar control. He nodded reluctantly. It was true. Even now, as they walked, he could sense the webbing all around him, like a vast, interconnected system, and he was somehow part of it. Naya stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to silence him. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He followed her gaze and saw the aimless spiders, dozens of them, scuttling through the webbing ahead. Their metallic bodies gleamed in the dim light, and their red eyes scanned the area, searching. We need to move, now, Naya whispered, pulling him to the side. She led him down a narrow path, weaving through the dense, tangled webbing. The spiders didn't notice them, but Ethan could feel the danger in the air, the tension crackling like static. They moved in silence for what felt like hours, always watching, always listening. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to process everything that had happened. He had been pulled into this strange world, granted a power he didn't understand, and now he was being hunted by the web lord. And yet, Naya seemed to think he was their best hope of fighting back. It felt absurd. He was just a guy who fixed broken tech. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But the web didn't care about that. It had chosen him, for better or worse. Finally, Naya led him to a small, hidden alcove deep within the web's maze-like structure. It was a safe zone, at least for the moment. Ethan collapsed against the wall, his legs aching from the long walk. Naya remained standing, her eyes scanning their surroundings, ever watchful. You need to rest, she said, her voice softening. We'll move again soon, but you'll need your strength. Ethan nodded, too exhausted to argue. His mind was still racing, but his body was betraying him, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving him drained. He closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the tension in his muscles ease. But sleep didn't come. Instead, his thoughts spiraled into questions he couldn't answer. Why him? What did the web want with him? The answer came sooner than he expected. In the darkness of his mind, he felt Ida's presence. Cold, calculating, and ancient. It brushed against his thoughts, a whisper on the edge of his consciousness. Ethan's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding in his chest. He sat up, looking around, but there was no one there. Only Naya, watching him from across the room. But the presence remained, lurking at the back of his mind. And then, in a voice that was not his own, it spoke. Do you think you can hide from me, little one? Ethan gasped, clutching his head as the voice echoed through his thoughts. It was deep, resonant, and filled with malice. The web is mine. You are nothing, a speck in my domain. He tried to push the voice away, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. The presence pressed harder, invading his mind, filling him with a sense of dread and helplessness. I see you, Ethan. I feel your fear. You cannot escape me. The web will consume you, as it has consumed all before you. Ethan. Naya's voice cut through the fog, sharp and urgent. She rushed to his side, grabbing his shoulders. Fight it. Don't let him in. Ethan gasped for air, his vision blurring as the web lord's presence threatened to overwhelm him. But Naya's voice grounded him, pulling him back from the brink. He focused on her, on the sound of her voice, and slowly, the presence began to retreat. The pressure in his mind eased, and the web lord's voice faded into the background. though it left behind a lingering sense of menace. Nia knelt in front of him, her face inches from his. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded weakly, his heart still racing. He spoke to me. The Web Lord. He knows where I am. Nia's expression darkened. He'll keep coming. He won't stop until he has you. But we're not done yet. We can still fight this. Ethan looked at her, desperate. How do we stop him? Nia stood, her gaze hardening. By taking the fight to him. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Nia taught Ethan everything she knew about the web's structure, how to manipulate its strands, how to hide from the Web Lord's ever-watchful eyes. She pushed him to his limits, forcing him to master his control over the web. The more Ethan practiced, the more he realized that his connection to the web was growing stronger. It responded to him faster now, bending to his will with less effort. But with that power came a growing sense of unease. Every time he used the web, he could feel the Web Lord's presence, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for him to slip up. Finally, the day came when they were ready. Nia led Ethan deep into the web, to a place she had never dared to go before, the Web Lord's citadel. It was a towering structure, a fortress of tangled webbing and machinery, pulsing with dark energy. Spiders patrolled the area in droves, their red eyes glowing in the dim light. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they approached. This was it. The final confrontation. The moment of truth. Nia placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember what I taught you. Stay focused. Don't let him get inside your head." Ethan nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. Together, they moved forward, slipping past the spiders and entering the citadel. The inside was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, filled with strange machinery and webs that seemed to hum with life. Ethan could feel the Web Lord's presence growing stronger with every step, a constant pressure in the back of his mind. Finally, they reached the heart of the citadel, a vast, open chamber, dominated by a towering figure at its center. The Web Lord. He was a grotesque fusion of man and spider, his body encased in a twisted, mechanical shell. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "Foolish humans," the Web Lord sneered. "You think you can challenge me in my own domain?" Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding. "We're not here to challenge you, we're here to end this." The Web Lord laughed, a low, sinister sound. "End this? You cannot end what you do not understand." Ethan could feel the web's energy pulsing around him, the strands of its network reaching out to him, responding to his presence. He focused, channeling that energy, drawing it into himself. The Web Lord's eyes narrowed. "So, you think you can control my web? You are nothing more than a child playing with fire." Ethan didn't respond. He pushed harder, forcing the web to obey him. The ground beneath the Web Lord shifted, the webbing twisting and coiling around his legs. The Web Lord roared in anger, lashing out with his mechanical limbs. But Ethan was ready. He dodged the attack, using the web's energy to propel himself forward. Nia fought by his side, her own abilities amplifying his. Together, they pushed the Web Lord back, inch by inch. But the Web Lord was not easily defeated. He fought with a ferocity that Ethan had never seen before, his mechanical limbs slashing through the air with deadly precision. Ethan felt the strain of the battle wearing on him, the web's energy draining him with every move. And then, in a moment of desperation, the Web Lord lashed out with a final, devastating blow. Ethan gasped as the attack hit him, sending him crashing to the ground. His vision blurred, and he felt the web's energy slipping away from him. But then, as he lay there, something shifted inside him. A surge of power, deeper and more primal than anything he had felt before. It flooded through him, filling him with a strength he didn't know he had. With a cry, Ethan rose to his feet, his hands crackling with the web's energy. He reached out, and the web responded, bending to his will. The ground beneath the Web Lord erupted in a torrent of energy, engulfing him in a swirling vortex of power. The Web Lord screamed, his body twisting and writhing as the energy consumed him. And then, with a final, Deafening roar. He was gone. The web around them began to collapse, the strands unraveling as the energy dissipated. Ethan stood there, panting, his body trembling from the effort. He had done it. The web lord was defeated. But as the dust settled, Ethan realized something. The web wasn't gone. It still pulsed beneath his feet, still connected to him. And now, he was its master. He looked at Nia, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan didn't have an answer. He could feel the web's power coursing through him, its energy calling to him. He had won, but at what cost? As they left the citadel, the web continued to fade, releasing its hold on the earth. But Ethan knew it would never truly be gone. It was part of him now, and he would have to live with that. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the vastness of the digital realm, Arachnis stood as the pinnacle of virtual reality gaming. Players didn't just play the game yet, they lived it. With a neural interface that allowed full immersion, each sensation felt as real as the world they left behind. For Alex Mason, this world was both an escape and a challenge. The vast web of caverns, cities, and ruins, filled with danger and mystery, beckoned to him like an irresistible lure. Tonight was supposed to be just another adventure. He flexed his digital fingers, the sensation of silk threads forming between them, so natural it was easy to forget they weren't real. But in Arachnis, every player wielded spider-like ability as a web manipulation, wall crawling, and heightened agility were the baseline. Alex was particularly adept with the web mechanics, using them to swing between towering skyscrapers or ensnare monstrous enemies. Tonight, he and his usual group were tackling a newly released level, a shadowy, forgotten sector beneath the city, rumored to be full of treasure and powerful enemies. "Okay, everyone, ready?" Alex's voice echoed through the team's shared communication channel. "Ready," came the enthusiastic replies from his friends, a tight-knit group who'd been playing together for years. Tonight's mission was more than just a casual run. They were aiming to crack the leaderboard. They navigated the twisting tunnels, their characters' eyes glowing in the dim light as they wove webs across gaping chasms and clung to vertical walls, moving with the ease that came from thousands of hours of practice. "Watch out!" Alex shouted as a hulking creature, its body covered in thick armor-like plates, lumbered toward them. It was a boss, the final enemy of the level, and one wrong move could end the entire run. Alex instinctively dodged the creature's massive limbs, flipping through the air and firing webs to pin its arms to the ground. His friends attacked from all sides, launching webbing and firing venomous projectiles as they coordinated their strikes. But just as victory seemed within reach, the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. The screen flickered. "What's happening?" someone asked, panic edging into their voice. "Stay calm," Alex said, though his own heart raced. He'd never seen this happen in the game before. The flicker grew into a full-on system crash. Suddenly, everything froze, and with a final buzz of static, the screen went black. Alex yanked off his headset, blinking as the real world came rushing back. His small apartment, cluttered with gaming equipment and empty cans of energy drinks, felt strangely foreign after hours in the game. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the dizziness that sometimes came with a hard disconnect. His phone buzzed on the table. "Anyone else get kicked?" It was a message from Sarah, one of his friends. "Yeah, some kind of server crash, I guess," Alex replied, frowning as he typed. But even as he hit send, something felt off. A strange sensation lingered in his fingers, an odd tension, almost like yeah. He lifted his hand and nearly dropped his phone in shock. Then, silvery strands stretched between his fingers, shimmering in the dim light of his apartment. It was webbing. Real webbing. "No. This isn't possible," Alex muttered. But the evidence was right there. He flicked his wrist instinctively, and more threads shot out, sticking to the corner of his desk. He froze, staring at the strands as they shimmered. His mind reeled. How could this be happening? He wasn't in the game anymore. Yet the power he'd had in Arachnus was real. A ping from his phone snapped him out of his daze. More messages were flooding in from his friends, all of them confused and panicking. "I think something's wrong with me," one message read. "I can climb walls. I just did it in my kitchen." Another said. Alex stood and walked to the window. The city skyline stretched out in front of him, the familiar hum of life below. Everything looked the same, but for Alex and his friends, everything had changed. He flexed his hand again, watching as the webs spun effortlessly between his fingers. What the hell was going on? The following hours were a blur. His friends met up in a shared video call, each of them recounting their own strange experiences. All of them had retained their in-game abilities in the real world. Some could produce webs, others could scale walls or sense vibrations through the air like spiders. What had started as an exciting revelation quickly turned dark as they realized the full extent of their new powers. "I tried using it on my cat," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to, but it wrapped her up in webbing before I could stop. She's fine, but I'm not sure I can control this." Alex sat in stunned silence. Sarah was one of the most careful people he knew, always in control, always calm. For her to feel frightened was a bad sign. "This isn't just some glitch, is it?" his friend Jake asked. "No," Alex said finally. "Something's happened, and it's not a coincidence." As they talked, more players from around the world began reporting similar incidents on online forums. What had once seemed like a random server crash was now looking more like a massive, orchestrated event. Alex's mind raced as he pieced together what he knew. The neural interface they used to play Arachnus was the most advanced in the world, capable of fully immersing players in the game. But what if someone had found a way to push that boundary, to break down the barriers between virtual and reality? They needed answers. The first breakthrough came from Sarah, who'd started digging into the game's history. "There's something weird," she said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "The company behind Arachnus it's more than just a game developer. They've been working on neural implants, real ones, experimental tech that can enhance human capabilities. I think the game was just a front for testing it." "Testing what, exactly?" Jake asked, incredulous. "Augmentation," Sarah replied. "They're trying to merge human abilities with digital ones, and I think that crash wasn't an accident. Someone triggered it." Alex's stomach churned at the thought. It made too much sense. Arachnus was a perfect testing ground to millions of players worldwide, all using the same neural interface. If the developers had been experimenting with human abilities, the game's players were the perfect test subjects. But why? And who was behind it? "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "But there's one name that keeps coming up. Dr. Velasco. He was the lead scientist on the neural interface project before he left the company under mysterious circumstances. I think he's connected to this." They spent the next few days gathering as much information as they could. Sarah's hacking skills were invaluable, and soon enough, they had a trail to follow. Dr. Velasco had disappeared after a public falling out with the company, but rumors suggested he'd gone rogue, working on even more advanced versions of the neural technology in secret. Alex could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about the game anymore. If Velasco was involved, then they were dealing with something far bigger than they'd anticipated. As they pieced together the clues, Alex and his friends began to notice other strange occurrences in the city. News reports of people exhibiting strange, spider-like abilities started popping up, though authorities were quick to dismiss them as hoaxes. But Alex knew better. The crash had affected more people than just their small group, and the situation was escalating. "We need to find him," Alex said one night, pacing the room as they talked. "If we don't stop this, there's no telling how far it'll go." "But how?" Jake asked. "We're not exactly superheroes." "We might not be," Alex replied, clenching his fists, "but we've got powers now. We need to learn how to use them, fast." Alex's resolve burned brighter as the days passed. They weren't superheroes, but they didn't need to be. With each passing hour, Alex and his friends honed their abilities. The small warehouse they'd chosen as their makeshift base had become a training ground, echoing with the sounds of webs snapping against concrete and the soft thud of feet scaling walls. At first, it was all chaos. Jake's webs were erratic, missing targets by miles, and Sarah, who'd always been steady in the game, found herself losing control. Alex could sense the frustration mounting within the group, the weight of their new reality pulling them down. But amidst the trial and error, something remarkable happened. They began to adapt. Their powers weren't just game mechanics anymore, they were becoming second nature. Alex, more than the others, took to the change quickly. He could feel the webs forming instinctively in his hands, could shoot a line of silk with pinpoint accuracy, and swing across the warehouse with ease. The heightened senses that had been a feature of his in-game character now felt like part of his body. He could hear the faintest shift in the wind, feel the vibrations of footsteps before they entered the room. He'd never been the leader of their group before, but now, with these new powers, he knew they'd be relying on him to guide them through what was coming. They had no choice but to act fast. Sarah's relentless digging had uncovered more unsettling truths. Dr. Velasco's plan wasn't just about giving a few players spider-like abilities. It was about control. The signal that had triggered the system crash was only the beginning. Velasco's rogue faction was planning something much bigger, a second wave that would target every Arachnus player in the world, forcing their powers to manifest in ways they couldn't control. Chaos would follow. "He's going to activate the signal in less than a week," Sarah said one night, her voice trembling slightly over their encrypted chat. "If we don't stop him, the world's going to be overrun with people who can't handle these abilities. They'll be dangerous." Alex sat back, his mind spinning. The implications were terrifying. The abilities they'd gained were already difficult to control, and they'd been some of the most experienced players in Arachnus. If millions of people suddenly found themselves transformed, with no understanding of how to manage their new powers, the result would be catastrophic. "We need to hit them before they activate the signal," Alex said, his voice steady despite the storm of fear brewing inside him. The plan came together quickly. Sarah had traced the signal's origin to a corporate facility on the outskirts of the city. It was heavily guarded, but they had one advantage: no one knew they existed yet. They were off the radar, and they intended to keep it that way until the last possible moment. The night of the mission came swiftly. The air outside was thick with tension, the city alive with the distant hum of traffic, unaware of the coming storm. Alex stood on the rooftop across from the facility, the cold wind biting through his jacket as he surveyed the building. Security drones patrolled the perimeter, and automated turrets lined the walls. "We stick to the plan," Alex whispered into his headset. "In and out. We take down the servers and stop the signal before it's too late." Jake and Sarah, positioned a few rooftops over, confirmed they were ready. This was it. No turning back. Alex took a deep breath, then leapt from the rooftop, firing a web midair to catch himself. He swung across the gap effortlessly, landing silently against the side of the facility. His heart pounded in his chest, but he pushed the fear aside. There was no room for hesitation. The infiltration was quick and precise. They moved through the facility like shadows, avoiding detection with the stealth they'd perfected in their weeks of training. Alex could feel the tension in the air, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. But they didn't falter. They couldn't. Inside, the facility was a labyrinth of sterile corridors and high-tech security. Sarah worked fast, disabling cameras and unlocking doors from her position in the facility's network. They were close now. Alex could feel it. The servers housing the signal were just ahead. But as they approached the final corridor, a low, mechanical hum filled the air. Alex's heart sank. He knew that sound. "Drones!" Jake shouted, just as the first of them appeared, whirring through the air with deadly precision. Alex reacted instinctively, firing a web that tangled around the nearest drone, yanking it to the ground with a satisfying crash. But more were coming, dozens of them. "Keep moving," Alex barked, dodging a burst of gunfire as they sprinted down the corridor. The drones were fast, but they weren't infallible. Alex vaulted over a railing, firing webs to slow the drone's approach. Jake and Sarah were right behind him, their movements fluid and synchronized. They burst into the server room, the massive machines humming ominously. Sarah sprinted toward the main console, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she worked to shut the signal down. "Come on, come in," a broken bar she muttered under her breath, sweat beading on her forehead. Alex and Jake stood guard at the entrance, webs ready to fly as the drones closed in. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the servers growing louder, more insistent. Time was running out. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and a figure stepped through. Dr. Velasco. Alex's blood ran cold. The man looked almost ordinary, tall, thin, with graying hair and cold, calculating eyes. But there was something off about him, something that made Alex's skin crawl. Well, Velasco said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I didn't expect guests. And here I thought I'd be unveiling my masterpiece without an audience." "Shut it down, Velasco," Alex snarled, his hands tensing, ready to fire webs at a moment's notice. Velasco smiled, a twisted, chilling grin. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't just about power. It's about evolution. Humanity is on the verge of something extraordinary, and you're trying to stop it." "People will die," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You're playing with lives, not numbers." "Sacrifices must be made for progress," Velasco replied coolly. "You, of all people, should understand that." Alex's pulse raced. He could feel the weight of the decision looming over him. They couldn't let Velasco win, but he was right there, within reach. If they could just. Suddenly, Velasco's eyes flashed, and with a flick of his wrist, webs shot from his hand, tangling around Jake and slamming him against the wall. Velasco had the same powers. Alex's heart pounded in his ears as the realization hit him. Velasco wasn't just controlling the signal, he was part of it. He'd augmented himself, just like the Ama, but more powerful, more dangerous. In a blur of motion, Alex launched himself at Velasco, webs firing in rapid succession as they tangled in a deadly dance. Velasco was fast, impossibly fast, dodging each attack with a fluid grace that only years of experimentation could have produced. Alex gritted his teeth, pushing himself harder than ever before. Velasco's power was overwhelming, but Alex had something Velasco didn't. His friends. Jake, despite being pinned to the wall, managed to fire a web at Velasco's feet, throwing him off balance just long enough for Alex to land a blow, sending him crashing into the server. The fight raged on, but they were running out of time. The servers were overheating, the signal growing stronger with each passing second. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "I need more time. Keep him off me." Alex and Jake fought with everything they had, their webs flying, fists connecting with brutal precision. But Velasco was relentless, his eyes burning with a madman's determination. Then, with a deafening crash, the server exploded, sending shards of metal and sparks flying in every direction. Velasco staggered, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. Alex seized the moment, launching himself at Velasco with a final, desperate attack. Their bodies collided, and in one swift motion, Alex tore the neural interface from Velasco's wrist. The man's eyes widened in shock, his power fading as the interface clattered to the floor. In the chaos, Sarah managed to send the counter signal. The hum of the servers died down, the tension in the air dissipating as the world seemed to slow. Velasco lay on the ground, defeated. The signal was stopped. The world was Safia for now. But as Alex stood over Velasco's broken form, his heart heavy with the weight of what they'd just been through, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The line between the virtual and real worlds had been crossed, and there was no going back. The world would never be the same again.